In March 2016, in the El Bosque neighborhood of Santiago, people began talking about Alison Hidalgo Calderón, a 17-year-old schoolgirl, in heartbreaking circumstances. She had a normal life, then suddenly disappeared, leaving behind an unfillable void. No one answered the phone, the doors were locked. Time dragged on heavily. Initially, there were no news reports, no police intervention, only weary waiting, a familiar feeling for anyone who has ever lost contact with a loved one. No one suspected that the truth lay right in the city, not in some remote, isolated place, but in what seemed like the safest place, the schoolyard. When the truth is revealed, it raises a haunting question. If a girl can disappear right in the middle of familiar streets, then where are we truly safe? On a Sunday in late March 2016, Alison Hidalgo Calderón was reported missing in El Bosque, a working-class commune in Santiago. She is 17, a student at the Liceo Fray Luis Beltrán. The investigation will later describe her disappearance as beginning days before her body is found, the missing time measured in phone calls that do not connect and doors that never open. In the first hours, there is no headline, no crime scene tape, just absence of space where a teenager's routine should be. Her family and the people around her begin assembling a timeline the way civilians always do at the start. Last sighting, last message, last known direction. It is the kind of work done with shaking hands, in kitchens and corridors, while the city keeps moving outside. The police logic, at this stage, is procedural and blunt. A disappearance becomes a report becomes a search, names are written down, time is recorded. The difference between "she'll be back" and "something happened" tightens with every hour she does not return. One fact anchors the opening of this case. Within days, Alison is no longer just missing, she will be found buried inside the grounds of her own school. But in Part I, nobody knows that yet. They only feel the cold uncertainty of waiting, the kind that spreads through a neighborhood without needing explanation. And the leading question is already forming, even before police can answer it. If a girl disappears so close to home, what does that say about the dangers hiding inside familiar roots? The story is about to pivot because the search will lead to a place everyone thought they understood, the schoolyard itself. 5 days after Alison Hidalgo Calderón disappears, the search collapses inward, not outward, not into forests or distant highways. It turns back to a place designed to be safe, the patio of Liceo Fray Luis Beltrán. According to the investigation file, police arrive after inconsistencies emerge in witness statements connected to the school's maintenance staff. A section of ground inside the schoolyard appears recently disturbed. The soil is uneven, too fresh, too deliberate. When investigators dig, they do not find clues. They find Alison. The fact is unmovable. Her body is discovered buried within the perimeter of the school she attended. No public alarm system failed. No locked gate was breached. The crime, investigators will later say, did not require forceful entry. It required access. The atmosphere shifts instantly. What had been a missing person case hardens into a homicide investigation. Teachers, students, and parents stand outside police tape that cuts through a familiar courtyard. A place once filled with routine noise is now silent, sealed, forensic. The school does not feel neutral anymore. It feels complicit, even if unintentionally. Initial forensic observations are careful and restrained. Officials avoid speculation. The cause of death is not publicly detailed at this stage. Autopsy results are pending. Investigators focus instead on geography. Why here? How here? Who could move inside this space without raising suspicion? Attention narrows, not to strangers, but to proximity, to those who worked when students were gone, to those who knew where cameras were not pointed, to those whose presence would not be questioned. And beneath the procedural calm, another question presses harder than the rest. If a body can be hidden inside a school, unnoticed for days, what does that reveal about the blind spots built into everyday trust? The investigation is about to change direction, away from possibility, toward a person. Once Alison Hidalgo Calderón is found, the investigation tightens. It stops expanding. It begins to subtract. According to police records, detectives focus less on who could have entered the school and more on who never needed permission to be there. The fact that reorders the case is simple and unsettling. The burial site shows planning. The body is concealed. The ground is restored just enough to delay discovery. This is not a spontaneous act carried out in panic. It suggests time, familiarity, knowledge of routines. Investigators begin mapping access logs, work schedules, and maintenance duties. They reconstruct who was present during the days Alison disappeared. The school, once a neutral backdrop, becomes an enclosed system. Every adult inside it is known, every role documented. One name starts to surface repeatedly in witness statements: a school janitor. According to the investigation file, he had access to keys, storage areas, and empty classrooms. He was seen working during hours when students were absent. He knew the rhythms of the building. His presence did not stand out. Police interview him as part of a standard procedure. At first, there is nothing dramatic. No confession, no visible agitation. But his statements begin to shift. Small details change. Timelines blur. Investigators note contradictions where he says he was, what tasks he claims to have completed, and which areas he says he did not enter. The atmosphere grows colder, not frantic, methodical. The kind of tension that comes from realizing the threat may have been embedded in routine labor, hiding behind uniform and familiarity. The leading question now is no longer abstract. It is sharply focused. If proximity grants opportunity, how far does access explain intent? The case is approaching a turning point not through force, but through movement. Because while suspicion settles in Santiago, the suspect does not stay. The investigation accelerates the moment the absence changes sides. While Alison Hidalgo Calderón is no longer missing, the man at the center of police interest is. According to the investigation file, the school janitor leaves Santiago shortly after the body is discovered. He does not notify supervisors. He does not wait to be questioned again. He travels south. The fact that sharpens suspicion is not the distance, but the timing. Detectives confirm he boards a bus bound for Puerto Montt, more than 1,000 kilometers away. In Chilean police logic, departure under pressure is not proof of guilt, but it is rarely neutral. The atmosphere becomes urgent, not chaotic, but compressed. Investigators coordinate across regions. Surveillance footage from terminals is reviewed. Passenger records are requested. The suspect's movement turns the country itself into a corridor of evidence. In Puerto Montt, officers locate him days later. He is not hiding underground. He is staying with acquaintances, living quietly. According to police statements, he does not resist arrest. There is no chase, no spectacle, just handcuffs closing in a city far from where Alison disappeared. The arrest reorders the emotional landscape. For the family, it brings no relief, only confirmation that the crime followed Alison beyond death, stretching into flight and capture. For investigators, it marks a shift from theory to confrontation. A suspect is no longer hypothetical. He is seated in a room, answering questions. And still, one question dominates the silence between answers. If he left because he feared evidence, what exactly did he believe police would find? The road has ended. The net has closed. What comes next will not unfold on streets or buses, but under oath, where words carry weight and omissions can become admissions. The case enters a different temperature once it reaches court. Cold, controlled, public. In the Chilean procedure, the formalization hearing is not about emotion. It is about structure, about naming facts aloud, under oath, and testing whether suspicion can stand upright. Prosecutors formally charge the suspect with homicide. According to the prosecution's presentation, the evidence is circumstantial but converging: access, opportunity, contradictions. And most critically, the location of the body. Alison Hidalgo Calderón was buried in a place the suspect knew intimately, a place where his presence raised no alarms. The factual spine of the hearing is this: the accused had keys. He had time alone inside the school. He was present during the window through which Alison disappeared, and after her body was discovered, he left the city. The court hears these elements, not as a narrative, but as a sequence. The atmosphere inside the courtroom is restrained. Alison's family listens without interruption. There are no outbursts, no visible collapse. Grief sits upright, held together by discipline. The judge does not speak of morality. Only one risk: flight risk. Risk to the investigation. Defense attorneys push back carefully. They argue the absence of direct witnesses, the lack of an immediate confession. They frame the case as one built on inference rather than certainty. But the prosecution responds with a pattern, with accumulation, with the logic that crimes inside closed systems rarely announce themselves loudly. Pre-trial detention is ordered. The suspect is remanded to custody, not as punishment, as containment. The leading question now shifts again. Can proximity and behavior be elevated into proof strong enough to survive trial? Because from this moment forward, the case will no longer belong to the police. It will belong to evidence. The trial opens without spectacle. No dramatic entrance, no sudden revelation. Just a slow reconstruction of days that cannot be repeated. In court, Alison Hidalgo Calderón is no longer a missing girl or a victim found in soil. She becomes a sequence of movements, opportunities, and silences. The central fact the prosecution advances is control of space. According to court records, the accused knew when the school was empty. He knew which areas were unmonitored. Prosecutors argue that Alison was lured or intercepted inside the school grounds in a moment where routine disguised danger. There is no claim of a public struggle. The crime, they suggest, unfolded quietly. Forensic testimony is introduced carefully. The autopsy confirms homicide, though exact details are presented with restraint. Soil analysis links the burial site to tools accessible on campus. The court hears how the body was concealed in a shallow grave, indicating urgency, but also intent to hide. The atmosphere is heavy, disciplined. Each witness speaks in measured tones. Teachers describe ordinary days that now feel compromised. Police explain how contradictions in the suspect's statements accumulated, how his timeline shifted when confronted with objective data, how his departure south aligned precisely with the investigation's tightening focus. The defense maintains distance. They question the motive. They emphasize the absence of direct eyewitnesses. They suggest alternative scenarios without naming viable alternatives. The courtroom listens, weighing silence against sequence. The leading question presses through every session. When a crime leaves no public trace, how much weight should consistency and access carry? As closing arguments approach, the case rests not on one explosive piece of evidence, but on convergence. Many small certainties are pulling in the same direction. And soon, the court will be asked to name what happened not in theory, but in law. The verdict arrives without drama, no raised voices, no pause designed for effect. According to the court ruling, the judges found the accused guilty of the homicide of Alison Hidalgo Calderón. The decision is unanimous. The reasoning is written, not spoken. Page after page, the court aligns facts with conclusions. The fact is formal and final. The defendant is convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. In Chilean law, perpetuity is not symbolic. It is measured in years before any possibility of review. Decades, not abstractions. The sentence acknowledges premeditation, abuse of trust, and concealment of the body as aggravating factors. The atmosphere in the courtroom is restrained. Alison's family does not celebrate. There is no visible relief. Justice, in this form, does not restore. It only closes one door. The defendant listens as the sentence is read. According to press accounts, there is no outburst, no apology entered into the record. Silence becomes part of the official archive. The court's language is deliberate. It names the crime as an abuse of position and access, a violation made possible by routine and authority mistaken for safety. The judgment does not speculate on psychology beyond what evidence allows. Motive is framed narrowly, opportunity transformed into control. Outside the courthouse, the case reverberates beyond the sentence. Schools across the region reassess security protocols. Parents ask new questions. Institutions are forced to confront how familiarity can lower defenses instead of raising them. The leading question left in the sentence's wake is quieter, but heavier. When the state names what happened, does that naming prevent it from happening again? Because even as the legal chapter closes, the social one remains unfinished. Alison's absence continues to occupy space in memory, in policy, in fear. What remains now is the aftermath. After the sentence, the case does not disappear, it settles. Into classrooms repainted, into schedules rewritten, into the way parents pause at gates they once trusted. The fact that remains unchanged is irreversible. Alison Hidalgo Calderón does not return. No ruling alters that absence. The school reopens. According to official statements, security measures are reviewed, access protocols are tightened, background checks are discussed with renewed seriousness. These actions are procedural and necessary, but they arrive after the damage, after a place meant for learning becomes a burial site, even briefly. The atmosphere in the community is subdued and lasting, not fear in the loud sense, but vigilance. Teachers speak more carefully. Students move through spaces with a new awareness of who belongs where and why. The familiar has lost its innocence. Alison's family retreats from the public record. They are not required to perform resilience. Their loss is not a lesson plan. According to reporting, they continue to demand remembrance over spectacle. Her name remains the center, not the crime. The case leaves behind a social reckoning that extends beyond one school in El Bosque. It forces a question institutions rarely ask early enough. How many systems rely on trust without verification? How often does routine become a blind spot? The final question lingers, unresolved by courts or policies. If danger can exist inside the places we mark as safe, what does real protection require? This is where the documentary ends, not with closure, but with responsibility. Because the ground inside a school should never hold a body. And remembering that is not an act of fear, it is an act of care. Just days before the most important law exam of her life, Lauren Teresa Giddings suddenly disappeared. No text messages, no calls, no sign that she had left home. Her apartment remained locked, her belongings intact, her car still in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be seen. The suspicious silence was just the beginning. Soon after, a strange smell emanated from the apartment building's trash can area. When police opened the black bag inside, all hope instantly vanished. It contained the body of a woman. From that moment, the peaceful apartment complex became the scene of a real nightmare. The most horrifying thing isn't just the body, but also someone in the crowd that day. Someone actively involved in the search for Lauren. Someone who appeared on television, looking panicked, and also the only one who refused police permission to search their apartment. Who had been stalking Lauren for months? Why were her apartment broken into without any sign of forced entry? And why did a seemingly harmless friend suddenly change his demeanor the moment news of the garbage bag was revealed? This story will lead you into one of the most chilling cases, where the villain can be closer than you imagine. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Maryland. She had loving parents and two younger sisters with whom she was very close. From a young age, she had a strong religious belief and a desire to help others. Therefore, she decided to pursue a career as a prosecutor to protect those who couldn't afford legal fees. She attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where she graduated with honors and served as president of the Student Law Club. During her time in university, she interned at a law firm in Atlanta and started a relationship with a man named David. After completing her studies, Lauren and David maintained a long-distance relationship, planning to get married once she graduated. In June 2011, she received her degree at 18 years old. But she still needed to prepare for her important bar exam. Lauren dedicated several weeks to study, taking a short break for her sister's wedding in Maryland. Returning to Georgia, Lauren attended a year-end party with fellow students and then informed her family that she would be focusing solely on exam preparation, requesting not to be disturbed. After that, she stopped communicating with anyone, and her friends and family initially assumed she was just busy studying. However, a few days later, on June 29th, her younger sister began to worry. She was on her honeymoon and frequently sent photos to Lauren. But Lauren wasn't opening those messages. This struck her as suspicious. Even knowing Lauren was studying for exams, her failure to check messages for several days straight seemed odd. She reached out to one of Lauren's friends and asked her to check in. The friend first tried to call but found Lauren's phone turned off. She then went to Lauren's apartment, which was located across from the university and primarily inhabited by students. The friend and her boyfriend arrived and found Lauren's car parked in the lot, but no one answered when they knocked. They had to use a spare key to get inside. The apartment was very messy, but there was a logical reason for that. Lauren planned to move in with David soon after, so there were bags and suitcases scattered everywhere. Although she wasn't there, her purse, phone, and laptop were still there. Everything was strange. No one knew where Lauren could have gone, leaving all her belongings and her car behind. Her friend contacted other acquaintances, and they immediately began searching for Lauren. They searched the campus and surrounding streets, but couldn't find her. As news of her disappearance spread, her relatives drove from Maryland to Georgia. Her friends continued searching but without luck, leading them to eventually contact the police. Officers arrived at the apartment complex and searched the apartment, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, they agreed that Lauren's sudden disappearance was suspicious and called forensic experts. When luminol was sprayed to detect blood, they initially found nothing. But in the bathroom, it revealed a significant amount of blood in the bathtub. Based on this discovery, investigators suspected that Lauren might not be alive. As they concentrated on locating her body, one officer noticed a strong odor outside, which smelled like decomposition. Following the scent, he discovered it was emanating from a nearby garbage container. Upon inspecting, he found a large black bag containing a female torso. Although they couldn't identify the deceased due to the missing head, investigators were nearly certain it was Lauren. They decided to handle the situation carefully, withholding information about the remains to protect the investigation. The discovery of her body was the result of several unfortunate coincidences. Police officers arrived at the apartment complex just minutes before the garbage truck arrived to collect the containers. They parked their car in a way that prevented the garbage truck from accessing the area. Had this not happened, the remains could have been taken to the landfill, and it is likely that no one would have found them there. While waiting for confirmation of the deceased's identity and considering their next steps, investigators learned something noteworthy. Lauren's relatives informed the police that she had often complained about strange occurrences in her apartment, feeling as though someone was moving her belongings while she was out. There were no signs of forced entry, and her door was always locked. This situation lasted for a long time, making Lauren wonder if she was going crazy. She also sensed that someone was watching her, although she never actually saw anyone. To feel more secure, she purchased an anti-burglar device that locked the door from the inside. But the odd incidents continued. Just before she disappeared, Lauren expressed her concerns to her boyfriend, David, who reassured her that it was likely just pranksters and not a real threat. The police quickly checked David's alibi and confirmed that he had been out of state for several days, eliminating him as a suspect. Meanwhile, forensic technicians searched Lauren's apartment for fingerprints or evidence, but found that someone had cleaned thoroughly and washed all surfaces. They decided to remove the entire bathroom for lab analysis, hoping to uncover new leads through DNA testing. Medical experts confirmed that the torso found belonged to Lauren and officially classified the case as murder. They estimated that the murder had occurred around June 26, nearly 3 days before friends and family began searching for her. However, they could not determine the exact cause of death or find any signs of struggle. Although investigators tried to keep the information confidential, the incident attracted media attention to the apartment complex. Rumors quickly spread that police had found a body. Even though Lauren's family hadn't been informed yet, the investigators decided to interview all of Lauren's neighbors and inspect their apartments, in case one of them was the perpetrator. All residents, who were fellow university students, consented to the searches, except for one 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, living in the adjacent apartment. Stephen refused to let the officers in, stating that as a law student, he valued his privacy and had nothing to hide. This raised suspicions among investigators. They discovered that Stephen had participated in the search for Lauren since the previous day and had spoken to journalists that same morning. He was a friend of Lauren's and attended the same classes as her. Lauren was the president of the Law Students Club, and Stephen was the vice president, meaning he knew her well but still opted not to allow police into his apartment. Meanwhile, Stephen remained actively involved in the apartment complex's activities. He followed police officers around, chatted with other residents, and even gave an interview to a local news station. During that interview, he recounted how he and Lauren's friends entered her apartment and helped search the neighborhood for her. Notably, he referred to her in the past tense, despite the fact that her body had not yet been publicly confirmed as discovered. When rumors emerged that the police had possibly found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen suddenly became quiet and noticeably changed his behavior, stopping his responses to questions. When asked if he was okay, he stated that he needed to sit down. He resumed answering questions but appeared genuinely shocked by the news of the body's discovery. After the journalists left, he remained in the same spot, staring blankly for several hours. Eventually, Stephen informed the police that he allowed them to search his apartment. Investigators first noticed an accumulation of various items in his apartment, including hoarded food, energy drinks, and weapons. However, they were particularly intrigued by a master key that could unlock all the doors in the apartment complex, as well as a spare key specifically for Lauren's apartment. Stephen confessed to breaking into several neighboring apartments while the residents were away. His confession led to his arrest for theft, and he was taken to the station for questioning. While searching his apartment, police discovered a saw package, which was concerning since the victim's limbs and head had been severed. Additionally, they found 2 USB drives containing illegal material involving minors and some women's underwear in his closet. A check of Stephen's computer revealed that he frequently accessed Lauren's social media accounts. He had viewed violent adult content and, according to the browsing history, had also opened her pictures at the same time. Furthermore, he had been active on a forum where he wrote stories about the murder and torture of women. One of his last internet searches was for the garbage collection schedule in their city. This accumulation of evidence led detectives to believe he was involved in the murder, suggesting he was obsessed with Lauren, especially since he had a key to her apartment and she had reported a break-in. However, there was still no direct evidence tying him to the crime. During the interrogation, the detectives tried to get Stephen to confess, but he behaved strangely. He only answered briefly and vaguely, like yes, no, and that he didn't know, which frustrated the detectives. They attempted to convince him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, urging him to confess to reduce his potential punishment. As someone trained in law, Stephen was not swayed by their tactics. The detectives eventually left him alone in the interrogation room, where he sat for a long time, staring into space. After questioning, they asked him to remove his t-shirt to examine his body for recent injuries and noticed several scratches that might have been caused by fingernails. He claimed not to know how they got there and suggested he might have scratched himself while sleeping. Understanding he wouldn't confess, the police shifted their focus to gathering evidence. They meticulously searched the apartment complex and made a significant discovery in the maintenance room. They found a saw that matched the packaging from Stephen's apartment. Forensic experts determined that it had been cleaned, but they still found traces of human skin belonging to Lauren. The investigators traced the saw's purchase to a specific store and obtained surveillance footage from that day, confirming that Stephen had bought it. They also checked the maintenance worker's alibi, which cleared him for the day of Lauren's murder, leaving Stephen as the only person with a key to every door, including that of the maintenance room. Following this, investigators delved deeper into Stephen's character by speaking with acquaintances. They described him as reclusive and peculiar, yet highly intelligent. They recounted how he would often pose two unusual questions to new acquaintances, how they would survive a zombie apocalypse, and how they would commit the perfect murder. This odd behavior left him with very few friends, and his fellow students had no interaction with him outside of university. Many people remarked that Lauren was the only one who attempted to build a friendly relationship with Stephen. Although his behavior was strange, she still tried to be nice to him. During the 3 years they lived next to each other, Stephen asked her out multiple times, but she always politely declined. He spent most of his free time at home, focusing on his studies. His windows were covered with curtains, and he never had guests over. After Stephen's arrest, police continued searching for evidence, but without success. They tried searching for Lauren's body but were also unsuccessful. However, they discovered a pair of women's underwear in Stephen's apartment, and testing confirmed it belonged to Lauren. Another shocking piece of evidence was found on a memory card in Stephen's apartment, a video showing him holding a stick with a camera attached to it up to Lauren's window just hours before she was murdered. This led all the investigators to believe Stephen was involved in the murder. A few weeks after being arrested, he was charged with 30 counts related to the possession of sensitive documents concerning children. While preparing for his trial, Stephen maintained his innocence, even as the prosecution planned to seek the death penalty. He hired a lawyer who had once taught Lauren, who argued that the police were framing Stephen and may have planted the evidence in his apartment. The lawyer also tried to persuade the judge not to impose the death penalty, as Lauren had previously opposed it. Nevertheless, the judge sided with the prosecution. The preparation for the trial dragged on for years, and the prosecution realized that with the current evidence, Stephen could avoid conviction. The death penalty required clear evidence, while the police evidence was indirect, allowing his lawyer to create doubt among the jury. Ultimately, the prosecution offered Stephen a plea deal. The charge of possessing minor-related material would be dropped, and the death penalty waived if he pleaded guilty and revealed the details of his crime. In 2014, 3 years after Lauren's death, he accepted the deal. According to Stephen, at 1:30 a.m., he dressed in black, including a mask and gloves, and entered Lauren's apartment with a key. He bypassed the security lock and watched her sleep for a bit. When the floor creaked, it woke Lauren, and she told him to leave. Instead, he attacked her, choking her as she tried to escape. After about 15 minutes, he believed she was dead. He moved her body to the bathroom and left it until the next day. The following evening, Stephen returned with tools, including a metal saw, and dismembered her body within hours. He packed the remains into plastic bags and disposed of them in various dumpsters near the university. He threw the torso into a dumpster next to an apartment building, hoping it would be picked up soon. Afterwards, he cut up his t-shirt, gloves, and mask and flushed them down the toilet. Stephen later claimed he didn't understand why he killed Lauren, saying he was confused afterward and thought she was still alive, which is why he participated in the search for her. However, the prosecution contended that Stephen was obsessed with her, citing his frequent visits to her social media and the video taken through her window. His forum posts and history of consuming violent content suggested he fantasized about causing harm to women. With Lauren set to move out soon, they believed Stephen may have decided to kill her, knowing he would never see her again. In any case, his confession was enough for a conviction, and he received a life sentence with the possibility of early release in 2041. 4 years later, Stephen filed an appeal, this time representing himself. He claimed that the police had violated his rights from the start of the investigation. During questioning, they yelled at him and denied him bathroom access without permission. Stephen also reported suffering a seizure due to the stress. The investigators, however, refused to allow doctors to examine him unless he consented to a search of his apartment. Additionally, he criticized his former lawyer for inadequate representation. The lawyer argued that Stephen had received a prison sentence with the possibility of a one-time release instead of facing the death penalty, which was quite favorable considering the nature of the crime. Nonetheless, his appeal was denied. In 2022, he tried appealing again but was unsuccessful yet again. Some of his relatives still believe he is innocent and was framed by the police. Stephen's father even created a website to fundraise for a new lawyer, but it failed to attract any donations and was quickly taken down. As a result, Stephen continues to serve his sentence. Despite this, he keeps appealing his conviction. However, many legal experts believe that he will not be released even after 2044 and will spend the rest of his life in prison. In a quiet seaside town, what began as a simple late-night stroll between two former school friends, Michaela and Jalek Keene, who had recently returned from overseas, quickly turned into one of the most shocking cases the community had ever faced. The next morning, Michaela was missing. Her phone was found left on campus. And within 48 hours, the search teams made a horrifying discovery. They found Michaela's body with brutal injuries. She had been savagely murdered and her body hidden in the woods. Michaela Conley had lived in Bar Harbor for 19 years with her mother and stepfather. Bar Harbor, located on Mount Desert Island near Acadia National Park, is a small town known for its natural beauty and steady stream of tourists. On May 31, 2018, she drove to Boston to pick up her friend, Jalek Keene, at Logan Airport and bring him back her home. Michaela and Jalek had gone to the same school, Mount Desert Island High School. Jalek graduated in 2015, while Michaela was still in the 10th grade. He played on the school's soccer team and had recently returned from Serbia, where he had been playing for an amateur club called the Kova Royal Crowns. They returned to her house later that evening. Around 2 a.m., Michaela and Jalek decided to go out for a walk. But Michaela never came home. The next morning, Jalek went back to Michaela's house and told her mother that he was there to retrieve his cell phone, wallet, which he claimed he had left in Michaela's room. Her mother, Danielle Timoney, was surprised to learn that Michaela had not returned the previous night. Jalek told her they had gotten into an argument and that he had walked away, leaving Michaela alone. According to him, he hadn't seen her since. Danielle immediately contacted the police to report her daughter missing. That same morning, Michaela's cell phone was found on the grounds of the Connors Emerson School. A school employee turned it over to Danielle, who confirmed it belonged to her daughter. Further investigation revealed that at 2:19 a.m. on June 1, 2018, a video had been uploaded to Snapchat from Michaela's phone. The footage clearly showed Michaela and Jalek together at a playground near the Connors Emerson School. Then, on June 2, 2018, a team of search and rescue dogs from the Maine State Police discovered human remains in a wooded area near Connors Emerson High School. The body was partially hidden beneath bamboo stalks and other vegetation. The remains were later confirmed to be those of Michaela Conley. Initial examination results indicated Michaela suffered head and facial injuries from a blunt object, as well as signs of strangulation. Additional abrasions, bruises across her torso, and limbs indicated that her body had been dragged and sustained further injuries. In the medical examiner's opinion, Michaela died from a combination of head trauma and strangulation. Her death was officially ruled a homicide. Jalek Keene was questioned, even before Michaela's body was discovered. Detectives Jason Fuller and Paul White of the Maine State Police conducted the interview. During questioning, Jalek admitted that Michaela had picked him up from Logan Airport and driven him back to Bar Harbor. He said he spent time with her at her house until the early hours of the morning. He confirmed that they had entered the Connors Emerson campus together around 2 a.m., which was later verified through surveillance footage. He claimed they spent about an hour on school grounds, during which they kissed and intimate. Afterward, he said Michaela became upset, and they argued. Jaliek showed investigators scratches on his back, saying she scratched him. He insisted that he left her around 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. On June 3, investigators conducted a site walkthrough with Jaliek before questioning him again. Investigators then obtained video from surveillance cameras around the school. After reviewing the footage, they determined that at 2:17 a.m., Michaela and Jaliek were walking along the path from Eden Street toward Connors Emerson School. They then moved out of view toward the playground on the Eden Street side. Another camera mounted on the building facing Eden Street captured the next moments. Although the footage was grainy and partially obscured by a cobweb, investigators were able to identify a figure believed to be Michaela. A man resembling Jaliek approached her. After a brief interaction, he lifted her onto his shoulder and walked away while she struggled visibly, kicking her legs wildly. At approximately 7:05 a.m., the video shows a person pushing a lawnmower out of frame. Moments later, Jaliek appeared from behind a row of bushes with Michaela's lifeless body. He grabbed her wrist and carried her quickly toward the wooded area where her remains were later found. He was wearing the same black clothing seen earlier in the night, and the distinctive tattoo on his left forearm, noticed by detectives during his interview, was clearly visible. The footage directly contradicted his repeated claim that he had left Michaela at 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. No other individuals appeared on any of the footage. Following the discovery of the body and the review of surveillance footage, Jaliek Keen was arrested and charged, but he continued to claim innocence. About 50 of Michaela's relatives and friends filled the courtroom during the trial. State prosecutors stated that Jaliek's DNA was found under Michaela's fingernails and inside her body. Physically, she never stood a chance against him. Michaela was only 5'4" and weighed about 95 pounds, while Jaliek was 6 feet tall and had weighed 180 pounds in 2015, according to his profile on the West Virginia University soccer team roster. The defense attorney argued that the state's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and that prosecutors could not definitively prove that Jaliek killed Michaela. He suggested someone else might have been on the school grounds and managed to evade the cameras. He noted that cigarette butts and an empty alcohol bottle found on the playground had never been examined to identify potential alternative suspects. He argued that the state lacked concrete proof of exactly how Michaela was fatally injured. According to him, the circumstantial evidence did not lead to certainty, only speculation. During the trial, Jaliek was shown a video, recorded on the grounds of Connors Emerson School, that appeared to show him carrying Michaela's lifeless body and, later, washing himself at a urinal. Jaliek claimed he had no memory of the events captured in the footage. Both prosecution and defense questioned him extensively. He said he had been awake for nearly 36 hours, having just returned from an international flight from Serbia, where he had been playing soccer. According to him, he remembered nothing from that early morning until he arrived at Michaela's house, where he had supposedly left his phone and wallet. In May 2019, the jury found Jaliek Keen guilty. The verdict was formally delivered on September 11. During sentencing, the judge remarked that Keen's refusal to fully accept responsibility, despite the video evidence, was appalling. He added that it was equally disturbing that Keen went to Michaela's mother only minutes after killing her, pretending to be concerned for her daughter. Jaliek Keen, 22, was sentenced to 58 years in prison for murder, along with an additional 30 years on related charges, to be served concurrently. Crystal Beira Nieves moved to New York from Puerto Rico in 2019 with her mother and 14-year-old brother. Over time, they settled into their new life. Crystal and her brother attended school, while their mother, Christy, found work and did everything she could to support her children. In 2021, Crystal graduated from high school and began searching for a job, but without formal qualifications. Her options were limited, and she applied for a position at the Burger King on 116th Street in East Harlem, just a few blocks from their apartment. Working as a cashier at a fast food restaurant wasn't what she envisioned for herself. She dreamed of going to college and learning a skilled profession that would lead to better opportunities. For now, however, Crystal focused on saving money to buy her first car, something she wanted to earn entirely on her own. Crystal faced several challenges during her early days on the job. Her initial work schedule placed her on night shifts. East Harlem had long struggled with social issues, including high crime rates, and Crystal felt understandably uneasy about working late hours. Homeless individuals often gathered outside the restaurant at night, and this frightened her. Concerned for her safety, she asked her manager to move her to the day shift. She was promised the schedule change beginning January 14, 2022. As she worked through her final days on the night shift, the anxiety only grew stronger. On the evening of January 9, 2022, Crystal prepared to leave for one of her last late-night shifts. Before stepping out, she told her mother she didn't want to go because she was afraid of the people who lingered around the restaurant after dark. But her mother insisted Crystal needed to take responsibility and finish her assigned shifts. Crystal went to work, and that was the last time her mother ever saw her alive. Upon arriving, Crystal changed into her uniform and began her shift. The Burger King operated 24/7, but there was no security presence. Around 1 o'clock a.m., a man dressed entirely in black, wearing a ski mask and holding a gun, walked into the restaurant. At that moment, there was no one on site who could protect the staff or customers. A customer sitting at a table became his first victim. He was struck on the head with the butt of the gun. The attacker then turned to the 59-year-old manager and violently punched her in the face before heading toward the front counter. Standing behind Crystal, he aimed the gun at her, demanded that she open the cash register and hand over all the money. Crystal obeyed immediately. She opened the drawer, took out the cash, and handed it to him. But there was only $100 inside. In a fit of rage, the man pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Crystal squarely in the chest. Once the gunman fled, the injured manager called 911. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and Crystal was rushed to the hospital. Despite doctors' efforts, she could not be saved. Officers secured the crime scene, but the attacker had already disappeared. The customer who had been struck and the manager who was assaulted told investigators everything they could recall. Both stated clearly that Crystal had not resisted. She followed every command. Yet he shot her anyway. The New York Police Department released an image of the suspect. Though the mask hid his face, they hoped someone might recognize his clothing or build. A $1,000 reward was announced for information leading to his arrest, and within days, it increased to $20,000. The loss shattered Crystal's family. Her life was only just beginning, and now her loved ones were planning her funeral. A memorial quickly formed outside the Burger King, where neighbors and strangers lit candles and placed flowers. Hundreds contributed to an online fundraiser to support the family. Christy decided to bury her daughter in Puerto Rico, their homeland. The fundraiser surpassed its goal, and JetBlue Airways provided free flights for the family. Meanwhile, police continued working around the clock. Flyers featuring the suspect were posted across the city and widely circulated online. Local news outlets covered the case heavily. Soon, there was hardly anyone in New York who hadn't heard the heartbreaking story of Crystal's death. 5 days after the shooting, police announced an arrest. Investigators had pieced together the suspect's movements through surveillance footage from multiple locations. On Friday, January 14, 2022, officers arrested Winston Glynn, 30, at a residence in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. In nearby dumpsters, they recovered several items he had used the night of the robbery. Detectives also located the cell phone he had stolen from the restaurant manager and thrown into a subway tunnel. Additional CCTV footage showed Glynn making an electronic purchase at a convenience store just an hour before the attack. Glynn, a Jamaican national living in a homeless shelter, was charged with first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, and several other offenses. Authorities confirmed that he had previously worked at the same Burger King in 2020, giving him detailed knowledge of the store's layout. The day before the killing, Glynn had entered the restaurant pretending to be a regular customer, an act investigators believe was part of his preparation. They concluded he had targeted the location because he knew it lacked security and had easy access points. Glynn did not know Crystal personally. He had quit long before she was hired. When police escorted Glynn out of the shelter in handcuffs and leg irons, he shouted angrily at a crowd of onlookers. People gathered outside the precinct jeered at him as officers led him to the car. During his court appearance, Glynn repeatedly accused the judge of lying. He was denied bail. At a later hearing, Glynn compared himself to Nelson Mandela and Jesus Christ. He also criticized how long it took witnesses to identify him, insisting the justice system mistreated people from the lower class like him. Glynn made bizarre comments about the Freemasons and the Illuminati, claiming powerful families profited from chaos in the city. His criminal record included at least 4 prior arrests, among them threatening someone with a weapon in November 2021 and illegal firearm possession in December 2020. Glynn pleaded not guilty to Crystal Bayron Neves's murder. If convicted of first-degree murder, he faces life imprisonment without parole. Court proceedings continued for months, drawing significant public attention. Despite Glynn's erratic courtroom behavior and repeated proclamations of innocence, the evidence, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and physical findings consistently pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. The community followed the case closely, hoping for justice for Crystal and her family. For her loved ones, the loss remained unbearable. But the arrest and prosecution of Winston Glynn marked a critical step toward closure. Some nights, Sandra Melgar lies awake in her small prison cell, unable to stop herself from reflecting on how drastically her life has changed. Never, in her wildest imagination, did she think she would end up a widow? And later, the prime suspect in her husband's murder. It seemed unimaginable that, a year and a half after his death, a grand jury would quietly indict her, and that nearly 5 years later, a jury would convict her based solely on circumstantial evidence. There was no clear motive, no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence directly linking her to the crime. Now, at 59 years old, every day since her husband's death has been nothing short of a nightmare. Sandra has been incarcerated at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison set in the quiet Texas countryside. She continues to stay in touch with friends and family, many of whom still firmly believe she is innocent. Sandra spends a couple of hours most weekends with rotating groups of family and supporters. She speaks regularly with her daughter and only child, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose. Though the loud prison environment and Sandra's gentle voice often make conversations difficult, Liz has become her mother's strongest advocate, taking on the role of spokesperson and passionately arguing that a terrible injustice has cost her both her father and her mother. She continues to struggle with the memories of that night. December 23, 2012, the night her husband died. Her inability to recall the events clearly has long fueled investigators' suspicions. But Sandra has remained firm. She did not kill her husband. As she lies awake in her cell, her thoughts drift back to the hours before everything changed. When she and her husband, Jamie Jim Melgar, celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary on the evening of December 22, soaking in their jacuzzi tub and enjoying what should have been a peaceful night together. That night, Sandra said she awoke to the frantic barking of their dogs. Her vision was blurred as she tried to orient herself in the dark. Her head pounded and her body ached. She found herself lying on the closet floor, her hands and feet tied behind her back. Her undergarments soiled, at 5 feet 4 inches tall, with 2 hip replacements limiting her mobility. Sandra tried to stretch her legs and roll far enough to peer under the closet door. But the bindings dug into her skin, and a chair had been wedged under the doorknob from outside, trapping her inside. The bedroom looked ransacked. Drawers hung open, clothes, pill bottles, and books littered the floor. Sandra's black purse and red wallet had been emptied across the blood-speckled white comforter. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed was smeared with blood, as though a knife had been placed on it. The back of a wooden chair carried streaks of dried red. In the partially filled jacuzzi tub, where they had celebrated just hours earlier, police found a white blouse, a green towel, and a silver 6-inch chef's knife. Blood droplets along the tub's edge painted the chilling picture of what had happened. The knife was later confirmed to be the murder weapon. Sandra and Jim had spent the evening celebrating their enduring love, marking their 32nd wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. Afterward, they planned to continue the celebration in their jacuzzi. Candles lit, cocktails mixed, strawberries and whipped cream set aside. Even after more than 3 decades of marriage, Jim and Sandra remained deeply connected, something Sandra later emphasized to investigators. Their story began during their senior year at Lamar High School. Jim, with his unruly black hair and slightly awkward teenage mustache, was instantly captivated by the blue-eyed, blonde 17-year-old who sat in front of him in class. Sandra, however, brushed him off for weeks until she finally agreed to join him and a group of friends for ice skating. Only when she showed up did she realize the outing was orchestrated. Jim's best friend vanished moments after she arrived. Jim's teenage charm and hopelessly corny jokes won her over. Sandra admired his humor, intellect, and compassion, while Jim loved her intelligence, grounded personality, and complete lack of pretension. The two became inseparable. And in 1980, 2 years after graduating high school, they married in a simple courthouse ceremony in downtown Houston. In the jacuzzi that anniversary night, Sandra and Jim reminisced about their decades together and talked about the future they still hoped to share. They dreamed aloud about selling their home, traveling across the country, seeing the Grand Canyon, exploring Ireland, watching the Northern Lights. Jim, only 5 months away from retiring after a long career as a computer programmer for the Houston Independent School District, imagined buying a beach house where they could eventually settle after their travels. They took turns giving each other massages, and the evening ended in a moment of intimacy. After 2 peaceful hours in the jacuzzi, Sandra said their dog suddenly began barking. Jim wrapped a towel around himself and slipped into Sandra's slippers before heading out of the bathroom to calm them. She had no idea it would be the last moment she would ever see her husband alive. When Sandra awoke nearly 15 hours later, she was lying on the closet floor, her hands and feet bound behind her back, her body stiff and aching, her undergarments soiled. Jim was gone. The dogs were barking again, but this time, she also heard voices inside the house. Terrified, she began screaming. Just after 4:30 a.m. that afternoon, Jim's brother, Herman Melgar, stood outside the front door, confused by the silence. Jim had invited Herman and his family over for dinner, but now neither he nor Sandra were answering the phone or the doorbell. Jim's black truck was still in the driveway, and Sandra's silver car sat in the open garage. Herman told his family to stay near the front step while he checked the backyard. Looking over the fence, he noticed a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola, a sign of the home improvement project Jim had been working on. Returning to the driveway, Herman decided to try the laundry room door inside the garage. If it was locked, he planned to leave. But to his surprise, the door opened. Inside, the house was dim, gray, and stifling. With all the blinds drawn, The dogs barked frantically as Herman opened the front door, creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere that his daughter Marissa Campos later described with a shiver. Something just didn't feel right, she recalled. Then they heard the muffled screams. Herman rushed toward the back of the house and found a large chair wedged against the bathroom closet door. He pushed it aside and discovered Sandra on the floor in a black satin nightgown, crying out for help. Herman and his wife, Maria, tried to untie the ropes binding Sandra's arms and legs. Herman grabbed a pair of scissors from the counter to cut through the tight restraints. The whole time, Sandra kept repeating, "Where's Jim? Where's Jim?" Her arms showed multiple bruises, including a dark one on her left bicep. Once she was free, she staggered into the bedroom and immediately saw Jim's feet sticking out of the closet. She knelt to check his pulse, but his cold, pale, naked body made it clear he was dead. Sandra gently covered him with a blue jacket. Maria then led her back to the bathroom. Sandra was hysterical when paramedics arrived, making it difficult for her to communicate with Stephanie Roberts, the first medic on the scene. Roberts noted in her report that Sandra appeared to be in shock, cycled between crying spells, and had no concept of time. Sandra believed it was still around 1 o'clock a.m. She had no idea it was already evening and that roughly 15 hours had passed nearby. In the bedroom closet lay her husband, Jim, with whom she had lived for 32 years, dead. He had suffered 31 stab wounds to his chest and hands. The closet walls were stained with blood. A gray telephone cord bound his ankles. According to the medical examiner, every wound was defensive. Jim had fought desperately for his life. One blow had nearly severed his right thumb, which explained the extensive blood spatter throughout the closet and bedroom. Police observed bruising on Sandra's hands and arms, along with a small scratch on her left thumb. There was no visible blood on her. Sandra told officers that after Jim went to bring the dogs inside, she got out of the jacuzzi and walked into her closet to get dressed. The next thing she remembers is waking up at an unknown time in the closet. She recalled screaming for help at one point, but believed she may have slipped back into unconsciousness, possibly due to a seizure. Sandra's health had long been complicated by several medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures. Because of the seizures, she had resigned from her job as a licensed vocational nurse, believing she could no longer safely perform her duties. In the weeks leading up to Jim's death, she had been experiencing auras, the warning signs that a seizure was coming. She explained to police that after seizures, she often slept for hours, waking up confused, disoriented, and in significant pain while crime scene investigators combed through the house. Sandra was taken to an interrogation room at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She complained repeatedly about the cold temperature, saying she was shaking and freezing. Sergeant Sean Carrizal and Detective James Doucet questioned her for nearly 3 hours about the 36 hours leading up to Jim's death. Sandra spoke softly, said she had a headache, and struggled to maintain her composure. She was able to recall certain moments clearly: removing her boots in the bedroom, changing clothes in the bathroom, and details of their conversation in the jacuzzi. But her memory was hazier in other areas, and she admitted she was having trouble remembering everything. She initially claimed Jim had been outside with the dogs for 15 minutes before she got out of the jacuzzi, but later said it might have been only 5 minutes. When asked about the inconsistency, Sandra admitted that she was terrible with time. She was just guessing. When Sean asked about their future plans, Sandra leaned forward, buried her face in her hands, and began to cry. Sean suggested she might have had a role in Jim's death, but Sandra abruptly cut him off. Detective James encouraged her to take a polygraph and asked if she was familiar with the exam and willing to try one. Sandra refused. She said she was nervous, shaking, cold, and afraid the results would be used against her. She insisted she needed to speak with an attorney first. The detectives tried to reassure her that they weren't trying to pin something on her, Her refusal, however, seemed to frustrate Dewey, who took it as a sign she might be hiding something. As the interrogation neared its end, the detectives grew increasingly frustrated with what they saw as gaps in her memory. They questioned how she could have blacked out while her husband, whom she claimed to love deeply, was being brutally stabbed just feet away. They asked why she hadn't heard him scream. Sean and James eventually stepped out of the cold, cramped interview room, leaving Sandra alone, crying with her face buried in her hands. Later that night, Sean contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office to pursue murder charges. Sandra remained at the station while crime scene investigators continued combing through her home. Ultimately, prosecutors declined to file charges. Citing insufficient evidence, news of Jim's murder spread quickly through the neighborhood. Worried residents gathered outside, speaking in low voices about the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong and wondering whether the killer might return. Some neighbors responded by installing new cameras, security lights, and additional locks. Neighbors described the Melgers as a quiet, private couple who mostly kept to themselves. Occasionally, they would see Jim working in the yard or Sandra coming and going through the garage. One neighbor later recalled being in his garage until 1 a.m., the night of the murder. Noted that he hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Sean and James. She told them that several items were missing from the house, including a bedroom television and bottles of Sandra's hydrocodone and phenobarbital. She had also previously informed detectives about a backpack containing a gaming console and games that had been left in the garage. Liz continued making follow-up calls, hoping something might help. Eventually, investigators stopped responding, leaving both Liz and Sandra uncertain about the status of the case. A year and a half later, in July 2014, Sandra was quietly indicted for Jim's murder by a grand jury. Because grand jury proceedings are sealed under state law, the public had no insight into what evidence or testimony was presented. Even after the indictment, the case moved slowly. Over the next 3 years, it passed through the hands of at least 4 different prosecutors before landing on the desk of Colleen Barnett in May 2017. Barnett had recently returned to the DA's office after a 4-year break under newly elected district attorney, Kim Ogg. Throughout her 24-year career, she had earned a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. According to colleagues and defense attorneys who had tried cases against her, she had prosecuted more than 70 murder trials, including the capital murder case of Suzanne Basso, who was executed for luring a mentally disabled man to Texas with promises of marriage and then killing him. Barnett understood the challenges of Sandra's case. No clear motive, no confession, and no direct forensic evidence tying Sandra to Jim's death. During the 13-day trial in August 2017, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating wife who had methodically planned Jim's murder, luring him into their bedroom with the promise of intimacy. According to the prosecution, Sandra tied Jim's ankles with a gray telephone cord before stabbing him. Barnett pointed to a bag of adult toys found on the bed, which Sandra said was a gag gift from a friend, as proof that she had staged the scene to support her story. Barnett acknowledged that she could not present a definitive motive, offering the jury several possible explanations instead. Jim's Houston Independent School District life insurance policy, or Sandra's alleged desire to end their marriage, but being unable to divorce because of her Jehovah's Witness faith. Sandra's attorney, George McSecrist, presented a very different narrative. He described Sandra as a vulnerable, physically fragile woman who had been railroaded by investigators determined to pin the crime on her. He emphasized the fact that detectives had attempted to charge Sandra with murder while the crime scene investigation team was still processing the evidence, suggesting that the investigators had a biased view from the outset. First emphasized the absence of physical evidence tying Sandra to the crime. There was no trace of her blood at the scene, nor any cuts on her hands. He presented an alternate explanation that Sandra had been the victim of a home invasion, struck on the head, bound inside her closet, and left helpless while intruders murdered her husband. For the jury, the courtroom showdown between Barnett and Seacrest often resembled a heavyweight boxing match. With the two attorneys trading strategic blows, one of Barnett's strongest punches came through the testimony of Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstruction expert with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Rossi testified that the scene did not support the theory of a home invasion. There were no signs of forced entry. The bedroom dresser drawers had not been rifled through, and a lit candle on Jim's nightstand indicated no struggle had taken place near the closet where Jim was killed. Rossi explained that most of the blood was concentrated inside the closet, aside from spatter on the back of a chair, the medical stool, and a few speckles on the comforter. She believed this spatter came from damage to an artery near Jim's thumb. She agreed with the medical examiner that all of Jim's injuries were defensive wounds. She also pointed out that Jim's loaded handgun, found inches from his body, appeared untouched. After 8 hours of deliberation over several days, the jury found Sandra guilty of murder. They sentenced her to 27 years in prison, far below the 99-year maximum. When District Judge Kelly Johnson read the verdict, Sandra let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed into her seat. The courtroom, packed with supporters convinced the trial would end in her exoneration, fell silent in disbelief. For weeks, they had tried to reassure Sandra that everything would be fine. But in an instant, that hope shattered. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, wearing a red blazer and leaning heavily on her cane, Sandra stopped to embrace Liz one final time. When they pulled apart, Liz collapsed to the floor. She recalled that she just remembered the room spinning and that she had felt completely alone. She said that everyone had expected a not guilty verdict, and when it hadn't come, she couldn't even describe it. She added that she had already lost her dad, that the person who had done it had walked free, and that her mom was now paying the price. She concluded that she had lost both of her parents to a justice system that had gotten everything wrong. Sandra's supporters directed their anger at Barnett, accusing her of twisting Sandra's statements, weaponizing her religious beliefs, and building a narrative that had no basis in reality. The jury foreman, however, insisted that Barnett's interpretation of events made the most sense. He said Sandra's shifting timeline, when they returned home, how long Jim had been out of the jacuzzi, when she went to the closet, undermined her credibility. He also questioned the authenticity of her reported seizure, noting that her medical records did not reflect any instability in her condition and that she never mentioned a seizure during her post-murder neurologist appointment. A month after the verdict, Seacrest filed a motion for a new trial, laying out in an 88-page brief why he believed Sandra had been wrongfully convicted. He argued that the investigation was deeply flawed, led by detectives who, from the beginning, were guided by a predetermined theory rather than evidence. According to Seacrest, the prosecution's case rested on speculation and assumptions that had no solid foundation. Sandy didn't kill Jamie, he insisted. However, Judge Johnson denied the motion, initiating what could become a long and difficult appeals process. Sandra's final chance to prove her innocence. When interviewed behind a glass partition at the prison's visitation center this past July, Sandra once again firmly denied killing her husband. Sandra now places her hopes in the appeals process, or in the possibility of parole. Her first eligibility date is February 2031, at which point she will be 71 years old. The McStay family seemed to embody the perfect California dream. Joseph and Summer had just moved into a new home in Fallbrook. Their business was growing steadily. Their two young sons, Gianni and Joseph Jr., filled the house with constant laughter. Friends described them as warm, hardworking, and devoted to one another. But on February 4, 2010, that picture-perfect life suddenly collapsed into silence. Without warning, all contact with the family stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages were never read. Their 2 dogs were found abandoned at home. Dinner remained half-prepared on the kitchen counter. It wasn't until November 13, 2013, nearly 4 years later, in a remote stretch of the Mojave Desert, a motorcyclist spotted something in the sand. At first, it looked like a small piece of debris. But as he got closer, he realized it was a small human skull, probably that of a child. The discovery that day revealed a shocking truth, proving the McStays did not disappear by choice. November 13, 2013. Mojave Desert, San Bernardino County. A motorcyclist traveling through a remote stretch of desert noticed something strange in the sand. A fragment of bone. When he approached, he realized it was part of a human skull, likely belonging to a child or young person. Shocked, he immediately contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office. Deputies secured the landscape and quickly saw what appeared to be the outlines of 2 shallow graves, barely covered by wind-blown sand. A major crimes team and forensic anthropologists were called to assist. The size of the operation and the specialized excavation tools showed that this wasn't an isolated discovery. During the careful recovery process, forensic specialists uncovered the remains of 4 individuals. Based on bone size and placement, investigators determined that the graves held 2 adults and 2 young children. Inside one of the graves, next to the remains, they located a heavy sledgehammer, a discovery that immediately ruled out any theory of an accident. The remains have been prepared for transport to the laboratory. Investigators feared the remains belonged to a family that had vanished suddenly, the McStay family, and that the long-held theory that they had voluntarily fled to Mexico turned out to be a disastrous miscalculation, a mistake that buried the truth for 4 years. To understand how a seemingly stable suburban family ended up in a shallow desert grave, we must go back to February 2010, when the mystery first began. In Fallbrook, California, the McStay family appeared to be living the American dream, a recently purchased home, a thriving custom water fountain business, and 2 energetic young boys. But on February 4, 2010, all contact with them abruptly stopped. Joseph's father, Patrick McStay, grew concerned when he was unable to reach his son, a rare occurrence, as they usually spoke every day. After several days with no response, Patrick urged his other son, Michael, to drive to Joseph's home and check on the family. At first, Michael assumed there was no cause for alarm. He thought Joseph and Summer were simply busy settling into their new home. But once he arrived at the property, his concern grew. The family's white Isuzu Trooper was not in the driveway, yet the McStays' 2 dogs were still on the property. Both animals appeared neglected, their water bowls bone dry. Michael walked around the house and found every door locked. To get inside, he had to crawl through an open window. Inside, it looked as though time had stopped suddenly. On the kitchen counter sat a bowl of raw food already growing mold. Groceries for dinner lay untouched near the stove. A cup of popcorn sat on the couch in the living room. Toys were scattered across the floor, as if Gianni, age 4, and Joseph Jr., age 3, had suddenly abandoned their play. Despite the eerie scene and the abandoned pets, Michael initially thought the family might have left town unexpectedly, but the total lack of communication led him to call the sheriff's department. Officers searched the home thoroughly. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no blood, and no sign that anyone had packed to leave. It appeared the family had simply walked away, mid-routine, and vanished. A missing person investigation began. On February 8, 2010, the search moved nearly 70 miles south to San Ysidro. At the U.S. Mexico border, the McStays' white Isuzu Trooper was found parked only a few hundred yards from the pedestrian crossing into Tijuana. The SUV was locked and showed no signs of break-in or violence. Investigators quickly obtained surveillance footage from the pedestrian gate. Grainy video from that same day showed a man, a woman, and two small boys walking into Mexico. Their silhouettes and heights resembled Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. But the footage was too unclear for positive identification. At the same time, specialists were completing a full examination of the computer recovered from the McStay home. The browser history revealed a series of searches made shortly before the family vanished, queries about Mexico's entry requirements and the documents needed for children to cross the border. These findings led detectives to form a working theory. The McStays had abruptly decided to start a new life in another country, the family. However, firmly rejected this explanation. Patrick insisted that Joseph had no intention of relocating and was deeply engaged in running his company's operations. Joseph's mother, Susan Blake, reviewed the border surveillance footage repeatedly, later noting that the man seen in the grainy clip did not walk like her son. Despite their objections, authorities officially classified the disappearance as a voluntary departure. That decision had serious consequences, because investigators found no evidence of a violent crime. Courts denied requests for warrants to access Joseph's bank accounts and detailed phone records. The family's financial records remained sealed, and due to a lack of legal authority to conduct a more thorough investigation, the inquiry has stalled. To fully grasp the tragedy that unfolded, investigators later reconstructed the family's final days before February 4, 2010. 40-year-old Joseph McStay was the primary breadwinner and owner of Earth-Inspired Products, a thriving company that designed and sold decorative fountains. The success of his business allowed him to move his family from Los Angeles County into a newly purchased home in Fallbrook. Meanwhile, Summer McStay, then 43, focused on raising their two young sons and settling into the new home. On the day the family vanished, she had been in frequent contact with her sister, who had recently given birth. Their messages revolved around everyday topics: household tasks, decor for the boys' rooms, and family plans. Digital records showed nothing unusual in her behavior. She was engaged in a normal daily routine. Joseph followed his usual schedule as well. According to Patrick, he spoke with Joseph every day. Their relationship was considered close and warm. On February 4, during their final phone call, Joseph mentioned that he was running late and would not make it to a scheduled business lunch. That brief update, mundane and routine, would be the last time Patrick ever heard his son's voice. While Joseph handled work matters, Summer remained at home with Gianni and Joseph Jr. The evening of February 4 should have been an ordinary one. But sometime after mid-afternoon, all outgoing activity from both Joseph's and Summer's phones stopped entirely and never resumed. There was no evidence of conflict, financial strain, or personal issues that could explain an impulsive decision to leave the country. On the contrary, recent furniture orders, plans with relatives, and active communication with business partners all indicated that the family expected to continue their normal life in Fallbrook. By November 11, 2013, the focus of the investigation had shifted entirely, from searching for missing persons to examining evidence at a confirmed homicide site. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office brought in forensic experts to analyze the two shallow graves discovered in the Mojave Desert. Because of the advanced decomposition, visual identification was impossible. Forensic specialists relied on dental records, which confirmed the heartbreaking truth: the remains belonged to Joseph McStay, Summer McStay, 4-year-old Gianni, and 3-year-old Joseph Jr. Autopsies revealed that all 4 victims had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries were consistent with strikes delivered by a heavy tool, the same 3-pound sledgehammer found inside one of the graves. Forensic analysis showed deep fractures and distinct impressions matching the hammer's striking surface, proving that the blows were intentional and delivered with significant force. The medical examiner also documented additional signs of violent assault prior to death. The youngest child, 3-year-old Joseph Jr., suffered multiple skull fractures, evidence of the brutality inflicted on the family. During the examination of 40-year-old Joseph McStay's remains, forensic analysts discovered an electrical cord tightly wrapped around the cervical vertebrae. Investigators stated that this indicated the victims had likely been restrained or physically coerced before being murdered. Anthropological findings confirmed that the burial had occurred long before the discovery. The condition of the bone tissue was consistent with roughly 3 years in the soil. The shallow depth of the graves, each only a few inches deep, pointed to a clear intent by the perpetrator to dispose of the bodies as quickly as possible. Once the cause of death was officially classified as homicide involving a sledgehammer, detectives shifted their focus to identifying the owner of that tool and examining everyone who had interacted with Joseph on the day he disappeared. Investigators began reviewing Joseph McStay's business circle within the first weeks after the family vanished. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's outdoor security camera confirmed that Charles Chase Merritt was the last known person to meet with Joseph. Their lunch at a restaurant on February 4 marked Joseph's final confirmed activity. At that time, Merritt appeared openly cooperative. He spoke freely with the media and voluntarily visited the sheriff's office for informal conversations. Merritt repeatedly described Joseph as his best friend. But even then, in 2010, detectives picked up on a subtle but troubling detail in his phrasing. He consistently spoke of Joseph in the past tense. However, because there was no evidence of wrongdoing and no body was found, investigators noted the anomaly but had no legal basis to detain him. That changed with the discovery of the remains in November 2013. Immediately afterward, Charles Chase Merritt was brought in for formal questioning as a suspect. When detectives confronted him with his past tense statements from 2010, Merritt could not offer a clear explanation. He insisted he had simply been careless with his wording and had not realized how it sounded. During the 2013 interrogation, Merritt repeated his version of events from February 4. He claimed that during their lunch, Joseph handed him several handwritten checks to fund ongoing projects for their fountain business. He also asserted that the two spoke twice more by phone later that day. Those statements became the basis for the next phase of the investigation. Detectives submitted the checks and phone records for forensic analysis, intent on verifying every detail of Merritt's story. While Merritt was publicly speaking about his best friend, FBI financial analysts gained access to the banking records of Earth-inspired products, Joseph's company. Their preliminary review revealed significant discrepancies tied to the checks Merritt claimed were given to him on February 4. Digital timestamps showed that despite being dated February 4, the checks were actually created and processed days later, at a time when all communication from the McStay family had already ceased. Investigators determined that, in the period immediately following the disappearance, more than $21,000 had been withdrawn from the company's accounts. The funds were accessed through a sequence of checks bearing forged signatures. Handwriting specialists later confirmed that the forgeries had been executed by Merritt. A deeper review into Joseph's business partner also revealed that Merritt had a serious gambling addiction. Casino surveillance confirmed that in the days right after the McStays vanished, Merritt had been gambling heavily, spending large sums taken from the business. One of the most damaging pieces of evidence came from a bank report filed by the bank's customer service team. Several days after the McStay family disappeared, a man called the bank identifying himself as Joseph McStay, demanding that the account be closed and all transaction history erased. The request was denied when the caller failed to provide the correct password. A later technical investigation traced the origin of the call. It had not been made from Joseph's phone. It had come from Charles Chase Merritt's personal cell phone. Additional clarity came from an email recovered from Joseph's inbox. It was sent on February 1, 2010, 3 days before the family vanished. In it, Joseph McStay directly stated that Merritt owed him nearly $43,000. This message helped investigators establish a clear motive: ongoing theft, mounting debt, and an attempt to erase financial wrongdoing by eliminating the person who could expose it. while financial specialists traced the money trail. Another investigative team focused on cellular network analysis. Reviewing cell tower logs allowed detectives to reconstruct Merritt's movements during the most critical period. According to the data, on February 6, 2010, 2 days after the McStay family disappeared, Merritt's phone connected to towers in the Mojave Desert. In the exact area where the graves would be found, investigators compared this geolocation data with Merritt's background and discovered that he had grown up in Southern California and was familiar with that remote terrain. This gave him the ability to navigate the desert far from major roads. Even more suspicious was the fact that his phone stopped transmitting for several hours that same day before reconnecting in a residential area. Prosecutors argued that this period of digital silence aligned with the time needed to dispose of evidence and prepare the shallow burial sites. A major breakthrough came from genetic testing conducted on the McStay family's Isuzu Trooper, which had been abandoned near the U.S. Mexico border. Although no signs of a struggle were visible, forensic teams carried out a meticulous collection of trace evidence from inside the SUV. Laboratory analysis revealed Merritt's DNA on the steering wheel and the gear shift, findings completely incompatible with the theory that the family had driven themselves to Mexico. The presence of Merritt's DNA on the vehicle's controls suggested that he had driven the trooper to San Ysidro on the night of the murders. Another key element came from surveillance footage captured by a neighbor's security camera in Fallbrook. On the evening of February 4, the video recorded a white pickup truck leaving the McStay residence. Although the image quality was poor, experts were able to analyze the dimensions and body characteristics of the truck. The results showed a perfect match with Merritt's white truck. Taken together, cell tower data, DNA inside the family's vehicle, and the surveillance images, investigators reached a decisive conclusion. Charles Chase Merritt had not only stolen money from the business, but had personally disposed of evidence and transported the bodies. During Merritt's trial, the defense attempted to shift suspicion onto individuals within Joseph McStay's inner circle, arguing that others had both motive and opportunity. The first alternative suspect they pointed to was Michael McStay, Joseph's younger brother. Defense attorneys emphasized what they described as unusual behavior. Michael did not immediately check the home when the family went silent and hesitated before filing a missing persons report. They also claimed that the white truck seen on the surveillance video could have been Michael's instead of Merritt's. However, investigators and Joseph's parents have rejected this theory. Michael's actions were viewed as the anxious fears of a worried brother rather than an incriminating clue. The defense's next proposed suspect was Dan, Joseph's former business associate who handled online sales. Known by some as Dan the Hacker, he had been involved in a long-running financial dispute with Joseph. Toward the end of 2009, Dan demanded a percentage of all revenue. Not only the online portion, their quarrels escalated into threats. The dispute temporarily ended only after Joseph gave him his BMW and made additional cash payments. Years later, Dan's ex-girlfriend, Tracy, claimed he had confessed to killing the McStays, but investigators found she had a long history of substance abuse and unresolved personal issues with him. Moreover, Dan had a solid alibi. At the time the family disappeared, he was on vacation in Hawaii. Witness statements and social media photos confirmed his location. Detectives also examined Joseph McStay's personal history. Before marrying Summer, Joseph had been married once before and shared a son named Jonah with his first wife. At the time of the McStay family's disappearance, Joseph's ex-wife was involved with a new partner, and tensions between Joseph and this man were frequent. Most disputes centered around parenting responsibilities and decisions that affected Jonah. Because of these conflicts, investigators briefly considered whether a personal grudge might have escalated into violence. Merritt's defense team attempted to exploit this angle during trial, suggesting that the partner of Joseph's former spouse could have harbored a motive for revenge. However, after thoroughly reviewing his alibi and reconstructing his movements on the day the family vanished, detectives eliminated him as a suspect. No evidence, physical, digital, or circumstantial, linked the man to the crime. With all alternative theories ruled out, prosecutors pieced together a detailed reconstruction of the family's final hours. On the afternoon of February 4, 2010, Joseph met Merritt for lunch. This meeting became a turning point. Joseph confronted Merritt about unauthorized withdrawals and missing funds from their fountain business. Just days earlier, on February 1, Joseph had emailed Merritt demanding repayment of nearly $43,000. Merritt, who had a history of theft and fraud convictions, now faced the possibility that Joseph might report him. Risking a lengthy prison sentence, investigators believe, later that evening, Merritt drove to the McStay home. Armed with a 3-pound sledgehammer, Joseph was the first victim. Merritt then turned on Summer and the couple's 2 young sons, Gianni and Joseph Jr. Forensic analysis showed that the killer had not relied solely on the hammer. An electrical cord found wrapped around Joseph's neck suggested that he had also been restrained or strangled during the attack, to mislead detectives and fabricate a narrative of voluntary disappearance. Merritt used Summer's home computer to search for Mexican border entry rules, travel requirements for children, digital breadcrumbs that would later be misconstrued as evidence of a planned relocation. Over the next 2 days, he worked to cover his tracks. Merritt accessed the company's bank accounts and issued a series of checks to himself, manually backdating them to make it appear as if they were written before the family disappeared. On February 6, cell phone billing records placed Merritt in the Mojave Desert. Prosecutors argued that he loaded the family's bodies into his pickup truck and drove them to the remote desert location. There, he dug 2 shallow graves and buried all 4 victims along with the sledgehammer used in the murders. Afterwards, Merritt drove the family's white Isuzu Trooper to San Isidro near the U.S. Mexico border, locking it in a parking lot where he knew cameras would capture it. He hoped the footage would support the staged narrative that the McStays had crossed into Mexico, but haste betrayed him. Merritt left his DNA on the SUV's steering wheel and gearshift, evidence that would later dismantle his entire alibi. After leaving the car, he returned to his daily routine, continuing to chat with the McStay family members and appearing to be a concerned, helpful friend. The long-delayed trial finally began on January 7, 2019, almost 9 years after the murders. During the pre-trial phase, Merritt cycled through 5 different attorneys and even attempted to represent himself at one point. Prosecutors built their case around key pillars: financial fraud, cellular location data, and biological traces found in the abandoned vehicle, and surveillance camera. Merritt's attorneys attacked the reliability of the evidence, arguing that the grainy footage from the neighbor's surveillance camera could not definitively identify Merritt's pickup truck. In an attempt to establish an alibi, the defense called Merritt's former girlfriend, who testified that he was with her on the night of February 5. Merritt's sister, Vanita, also took the stand, suggesting that Merritt might have been in the Mojave Desert because he was visiting her. Prosecutors undermined her claim by presenting a recording of a 2013 interview in which Vanita clearly stated that her brother had not visited her at all during the previous 5 years. Susan Blake, Joseph's mother, called Merritt a coward and a cold-blooded criminal. Patrick McStay reminded the court that Joseph had helped Merritt financially and legally in 2009 when Merritt faced serious legal troubles. Joseph's eldest son, Jonah, who was 12 when his father disappeared, read a moving statement describing how the murders had shaped the course of his life. In response, Charles Chase Merritt addressed the court directly, delivering his statement through tears. He insisted he was innocent and claimed that he had loved the McStay family. Merritt vowed that, before God, he would one day prove that everyone was wrong. But the jury did not weigh his emotion. They weighed the evidence. After only a short period of deliberation, the jury returned with its decision. Charles Chase Merritt was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. On January 21, 2020, a judge of the San Bernardino County Superior Court formally announced the final sentence. At 62 years old, Merritt was sentenced to death for the murders of Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Little Joseph Jr. Merritt's defense team filed a motion requesting a new trial, citing alleged prosecutorial misconduct. But the court rejected the motion. Meanwhile, California had not carried out an execution since 2006, and a moratorium on the death penalty was imposed after that. Under this system, Merritt was transferred to death row but is expected to spend the remainder of his life there, with no execution date in sight. Despite the irrefutable evidence presented in court, Merritt continued to deny responsibility, repeatedly asserting that he intended to prove his innocence in the future. By the time the sentence was handed down, the McStay family's material possessions had long ceased to be theirs. In June 2011, Joseph's decorative fountain business was sold for over $100,000. The Fallbrook home, where all phone activity from Joseph and Summer abruptly stopped on February 4, 2010, has since changed ownership multiple times. Today, little remains to physically mark the place where the family spent their final evening. The only tangible reminder left from this tragedy is a 3-pound sledgehammer preserved in an evidence vault. The very tool that brought a peaceful family's life to a brutal end and ultimately revealed the truth, buried beneath the sands of the Mojave Desert. Andreen McDonald had a dream life: beautiful, intelligent, a successful career, and a model military husband. However, behind that perfect facade lay a terrifying secret. Andreen had confided in friends that if she disappeared, her husband might be the killer. No one expected those words to come true. One morning in March 2019, Andreen suddenly vanished. No text messages, no indication that she left voluntarily. Police searched her million-dollar mansion in Stone Oak and found suspicious signs: small bloodstains on a light switch, hair in the bathroom, ashes in the backyard, and newly purchased items such as a hammer, gasoline, gloves, and large garbage bags. These items raised suspicions of a murder. All the clues pointed to a horrifying truth. What happened inside that luxurious house? Why would a devoted mother and successful businesswoman disappear so mysteriously and horrifyingly? This story is sure to terrify anyone who hears it. Andreen McDonald was born on September 23, 1989, in Port Antonio, Jamaica. She was the second of 3 sisters. Her family moved to the United States in search of better opportunities. From a young age, Andreen strongly believed that hard work could make dreams come true. She loved sports and excelled at weightlifting. Beyond her physical strength, Andreen possessed an entrepreneurial spirit. In May 2009, when she was 19, she met Andre McDonald, a 29-year-old U.S. Air Force captain who had returned to Jamaica for a funeral. Andre seemed like the perfect man to Andreen. He was impressive, accomplished, and could help her achieve her long-held dream of living in America. She was thrilled to meet him. He convinced her to move to the United States, and their relationship developed rapidly 2 months after meeting. In July 2009, they married in Florida, where Andre was stationed. This seemingly perfect beginning would soon become complex and tragic. After their marriage, Andre was transferred to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. They settled into their new life and soon had a daughter, Elena, determined to succeed on her own. Andreen enrolled at the University of Texas at San Antonio, UTSA, where she earned a bachelor's degree in business administration with a focus on finance. But her ambitions went beyond a college degree. At just 22, she launched Starlight Homes, an assisted living business. with Andre as her business partner. Andre had a good credit history and military experience, which helped them secure the initial loan. But Andrine was the one who drove the company's growth. From their home healthcare business, Andrine and Andre built a fortune. They split the profits equally, but everyone knew that Andrine was the visionary, understanding every detail of the business and making it happen. By 2019, they owned a magnificent home in Stone Oak and had accumulated great wealth. However, their success brought tension. A hidden conflict was growing beneath the surface of their perfect life, one that would eventually destroy everything they had built. February 28, 2019, began like any other day for the McDonald family. Andrine has these daily habits: going to the gym in the morning, working at the nursing home, and meeting Andre at their tax office. But this seemingly ordinary day would be the last day of Andrine McDonald's life. The tax office appointment was a routine family affair. They were expanding their business, planning for a fourth nursing home, and managing the complex financial affairs of their growing enterprise. As Andre sat in the waiting area, reviewing paperwork, he uncovered a shocking truth. Andrine had secretly created a separate business named after their daughter. Andre felt betrayed, believing she was trying to rob him. On the way home, Andre felt uneasy and suspected Andrine wanted to remove him from their joint business. His anger was fueled by more than just the business discovery. Andre also suspected Andrine was having an affair with Aubin Hall, an ex-boyfriend from Jamaica. The combination of financial betrayal and suspected infidelity created intense rage that would explode later that evening. Back at home, their argument continued. Feeling trapped and betrayed, Andre threatened to file for divorce and divide their business assets. This threat terrified Andrine, as it meant the potential destruction of the empire she had worked so hard to build. Around 9:00 p.m. that night, both Andre and Andrine's phones lost signal. This was strange, especially for Andrine, as she always needed to stay in contact with work and staff. Phone data showed that was the last time her phone was connected to the cellular network. Needing to calm down, Andre drove to a nearby gas station. However, he couldn't shake his anger. From the gas station, the argument continued via text message, with accusations about business decisions, financial control, and infidelity. Andre texted Andrine that all she did was scheme, but he was no fool. The messages revealed a marriage in crisis, discussing divorce and expressing bitterness about trust and loyalty. In one exchange, Andre texted Andrine that he didn't care if she filed for divorce, revealing a man who felt he had nothing to lose. When Andre returned home around midnight, he expected to find Andrine asleep in their daughter's room, where she sometimes slept after arguments. Instead, he found her waiting to continue their confrontation. The verbal argument quickly escalated when he again raised the possibility of divorce and dividing their business. The confrontation ended in the master bathroom. On Friday morning, March 1, 2019, Andrine's employees at Starlight Homes became concerned when she didn't show up for work on time. This was unusual, as she was always dedicated to her job. Carol Gonbar, a close friend of Andrine, received a call from one of Andrine's employees in the middle of the morning. When Carol tried calling Andrine's phone, it went straight to voicemail. Sensing something was wrong, Carol drove to Andrine's home on Solitude Cove. Knowing the family well, she entered the house and began searching for Andrine. What she discovered in the master bathroom would haunt her forever: bloodstains on the light switch and what appeared to be human hair. Alarmed, Carol immediately called Andre's mother, Maureen Smith, asking her to come to the house. Upon seeing the blood, Maureen called 911 to report her daughter missing. Deputy Richard Lozano was among the first responders to arrive at 1042 Solitude Cove. He immediately noticed several red flags. Andrine's purse, ID, and keys were still in the house. Both of her vehicles were parked in the driveway. Most disturbingly, there was clear evidence of blood in the master bathroom. In the backyard, investigators found a burn pile containing recently burned items. In the ashes, they found a zipper from a jacket, later identified as belonging to Andrine. This burn pile was new, as it hadn't been there during previous visits. This suggested someone was deliberately destroying evidence. While investigators were examining the scene, Andre MacDonald arrived home. His behavior immediately seemed suspicious to law enforcement. When asked about Andrine's whereabouts, Andre claimed ignorance but mentioned they had argued the previous night. He then said he would check Baptist Emergency Hospital, suggesting Andrine might be there for her migraines. Surveillance footage showed Andre's visit to the hospital. He entered and inquired about a patient named MacDonald. When told there was a MacDonald in room 3, he seemed briefly hopeful. However, upon learning it wasn't his wife, his reaction was telling. Instead of relief, he appeared frustrated by the false lead. Upon returning home and finding law enforcement still present, Andre told them that Andrine was at the hospital. However, Deputy Richard Lozano called the hospital and discovered that the MacDonald admitted was not Andrine. When confronted with this, Andre changed his story and claimed he didn't know where his wife was. The following morning, March 2nd, another disturbing discovery emerged. The deputy officers returned to Andrine's home and found the garage door had come off its tracks. The door had been intact the day before. Clearly, someone had been home overnight. Inside the garage, investigators found several suspicious items. These included a shovel, an axe, a small hammer, thick garbage bags, gloves, and 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline. In a trash can, they found a yellow claw hammer with what appeared to be blood on both the face and handle. Hidden among the trash was a torn receipt from Lowe's, documenting the recent purchase of many of the items found in the garage. Surveillance footage later showed Andre purchasing these items on the morning of March 1st. The same day his wife was reported missing. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood on the hammer belonged to Andrine MacDonald, although Andrine's body had not been found. Her missing person case was reclassified as a homicide. This became one of the most extensive investigations in San Antonio's history, headed by Detective Frank Stubbs and the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, volunteers, and specialized Air Force teams searched miles of Texas terrain for any sign of Andrine. Meanwhile, the evidence against Andrine grew. The torn receipt and the bloody hammer suggested premeditated murder and an attempted cover-up. Detective Frank Stubbs believes Andrine's disappearance was due to Andre disposing of her body. In addition to purchasing tools, Andre searched online for suspicious information. Investigators found hundreds of searches on his phone about DNA evidence, fingerprints, burned bodies, and decomposition. These searches seemed unusual for someone worried about a missing wife. Instead, they suggested he was trying to hide a crime. On March 3, 2019, just 2 days after Andrine was reported missing, Andre MacDonald was arrested. However, investigators could only charge him with tampering with evidence based on the torn Lowe's receipt, without a body. Proving murder was nearly impossible. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Andre was eventually released on bond in April 2019, pending trial. During the months he was free, the search for Andrine continued relentlessly, with volunteers organizing search parties covering hundreds of square miles of South Texas. The Andrine family offered a large reward for anyone who provided information about her, and her story was widely reported on local and national news channels. Despite these efforts, she disappeared completely. The subsequent investigation revealed disturbing truths about Andrine and Andre's marriage, a stark contrast to the successful and happy image they presented to the public. Several witnesses reported that Andrine had expressed fears about Andre's behavior. She told her friends that if she were to disappear, Andre would be the one responsible for her death. This wasn't just a baseless fear. It was a premonition from a woman who understood the dangerous nature of her husband. According to witnesses, Andre had a history of physically abusing Andrine. and their relationship had become increasingly strained in the months before her disappearance. The business dispute André cited as the cause of their final argument was more complicated than it seemed. Investigators discovered Andrine had established a separate real estate management company, naming it after their daughter, Elena. But this wasn't financial fraud as André had claimed. In Texas, under marriage law, André was entitled to half of his wife's income, regardless of whose name the business was registered under. Andrine's decision was not theft. It was an attempt to protect the assets she had worked hard to build. Similarly, the allegations of an affair that André used to justify his anger were disputed by those close to Andrine. While she may have been in contact with Aubin in Jamaica, friends and family denied André's claim that it was a current romantic relationship. Instead, they described a woman who was increasingly isolated by a controlling husband and seeking emotional support from trusted friends. As the investigation dragged on into the summer, it seemed to have stalled. André remained free on bond, maintained his innocence, and refused to help the police find his wife. The community was anxious, wondering if a murderer was living among them. Then, on July 11, 2019, 133 days after Andrine disappeared, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Clifton Klabunde was working on his ranch in northern Bexar County when he found what appeared to be human remains hidden among animal bones in a remote field. The location was about 6 miles from Andrine's home, in an isolated area difficult to find without specific knowledge of the terrain. When Clifton called the authorities, forensic teams and crime scene investigators arrived immediately. What they found was horrifying. The human remains were badly decomposed, having been exposed to the elements for over 4 months. The bones were scattered and mixed with cow bones and other animal remains, suggesting an attempt to hide the human remains among animal bones. There was also evidence of fire damage, indicating that the remains had been burned, likely to destroy DNA and make identification more difficult. But investigators found something crucial to the identification: dental records that matched Andrine's. The scene suggested a calculated attempt to dispose of and conceal the body. The remains weren't simply dumped. They had been strategically placed among animal bones and burned to make them unidentifiable. This was not the act of someone who killed in a moment of passion and panicked. It was the work of someone who had carefully planned how to hide the evidence of a murder. A cross tattoo, visible on Andrine's remains, and a wig believed to belong to her was also found following a thorough search. The cross tattoo was a distinctive feature that helped investigators confirm the identity. But the dental records provided definitive proof. On July 13, 2019, the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the remains were those of Andrine McDonald. Dr. James Feig, the forensic examiner, determined that Andrine suffered severe blunt force trauma. Her injuries included a fractured spinal cord, broken ribs, and a split jaw, all consistent with repeated blows from a blunt object. While the remains' decomposed state made determining the exact cause of death impossible, the injury pattern indicated extreme violence. With Andrine's remains identified, investigators finally had enough evidence. On July 14, 2019, André McDonald was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence tampering case became a capital murder investigation. However, André maintained his innocence for almost 4 years. He attended court hearings, met with his lawyers, and prepared for trial, consistently denying involvement in his wife's death. His defense team built their case on the lack of direct evidence and the remains' decomposition. Then, 3 days before his trial in January 2023, André made a phone call that changed everything. Cindy Johnson, Andrine's sister, received an unexpected call. She didn't recognize the number, but was shocked to hear André's voice. During that call, André revealed details to Cindy and her mother, Maureen, that stunned even his defense team. For the first time since Andrine's disappearance, André described the events of February 28, 2019. However, it wasn't a murder confession, but a claim of self-defense. The courtroom was packed when the trial began in January 2023, drawing those who had been following the shocking case. It became one of San Antonio's most closely watched criminal proceedings. Assistant District Attorney Stephen Spear portrayed Andre as a controlling husband who murdered his wife in a fit of rage. The prosecution presented strong evidence: Andre's suspicious purchases at Lowe's, the bloody hammer, and his internet searches about DNA and decomposition, all suggesting premeditated murder and a cover-up. The defense, however, presented a different story. Attorney John Convery argued that it was not a murder case. He stated that Andre had acted in self-defense. They showed videos of Andrine lifting as much as 300 pounds, arguing that she could have overpowered her husband despite being smaller and younger. On the sixth day of the trial, Andre testified for 4.5 hours, showing no remorse as he gave a disturbing account. He described an argument about their business and Andrine waiting at home to continue the argument. Andre claimed that after a head collision, Andrine became enraged and began punching him. He said he grabbed her, tripped her, and she fell. He admitted to kicking her twice. He testified that their 7-year-old daughter, Elena, was present, as he heard her footsteps after the fighting woke her up. Andre claimed he put Elena back to bed and then found Andrine dead. He stated that he never considered calling for help, and then described covering up the crime. This included dumping Andrine's body, burning her clothes, and buying tools to dismember her. Most shockingly, Andre described returning to mutilate Andrine's remains after investigators searched his home. Even while describing this, Andre showed no remorse, blaming Andrine. Prosecutor Stephen Spear found this surreal, noting that most people he prosecuted for causing death showed remorse. But Andre seemed to still be angry with her. After nearly 13 hours of deliberation, the jury found Andre McDonald not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter. For Andrine's family, the verdict was devastating. Her sister, Cindy Johnson, expressed outrage that he received a manslaughter conviction after showing no remorse or love, and after using a hammer, stripping her clothes, throwing gasoline on her, and burning her. Cindy considered the verdict absurd and said she would never accept it for the rest of her life. On February 7, 2023, Judge Frank Castro sentenced Andre McDonald to the maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. A week later, he received an additional 5 years for tampering with evidence. Judge Castro criticized Andre's lack of emotion and found it appalling that Andre had killed Andrine in front of their daughter and disposed of her body. Before sentencing, the court heard emotional statements from Andrine's family. Her sister, Cindy Johnson, directly addressed Andre, asking why he chose murder instead of divorce and asserting that he could not escape his actions or God. 7-year-old Elena's words to Andre were the most devastating. She said he killed her mother, ruined her life, broke her heart, and hurt her. She also declared that he would be punished forever for what he did. Her words revealed the devastating truth: she witnessed her father kill her mother. The Andrine McDonald case had repercussions beyond the criminal court. In 2024, a civil jury awarded Andrine's family $210 million in a wrongful death lawsuit, reportedly the largest personal injury verdict in Bexar County history. In every peaceful town, behind every perfect family portrait, there can be a story no one dares to imagine. It was one of those quiet Italian communities where the days felt predictable, the streets felt safe, and the Del Grande family appeared to be everything a household should be: hardworking, respected, united. But behind the walls of their elegant home, something far more sinister had been growing for years. An emotional storm centered around one troubled son. And on a cold January night in 1998, That storm finally erupted, leaving a trail of devastation that shook Italy to its core. This is the story of Elia del Grande, the man who would turn his family home into a massacre scene. Elia del Grande was raised in a hard-working family. His father, Elia del Grande, had always been ambitious, studious, determined, and committed to building something of his own. Through years of dedication, he managed to open and grow a family bakery business that became well known in the area. Shortly after completing his studies, Elia met Alida, a driven young woman, 5 years his junior. They quickly began a relationship, married soon after, and welcomed their first son, Enrico. 5 years later, their second child, Elia, was born. They did not plan to have more children. They wanted to focus on expanding their business and raising their 2 sons, future heirs to the family enterprise. Enrico grew up intelligent, quiet, and diligent. Elia, on the other hand, was his complete opposite. From early childhood, Elia was energetic, impulsive, and increasingly difficult to control. Even Elia struggled with his temper. When Elia began attending school, his behavior only worsened. He frequently clashed with classmates, leading the family to consider placing him in a special program for troubled youth. In the end, they decided instead to have him live temporarily with his grandmother and aunt. For 3 years, Elia stayed with his relatives. When he returned home, his parents hoped that the change of environment had made a difference. At first, he seemed calmer, but soon the disruptive behavior resumed. When Elia graduated from school, the family hoped maturity would help him settle down. His parents did everything they could to support him, but their efforts failed. Elia had fallen into alcohol and banned substances use as a teenager, and after graduation, his addictions deepened. The Del Grande family lived together in a large home in Cadrazate, a peaceful town in northern Italy. Locals respected Elia, Alida, and Enrico for their kindness and work ethic. Elia, however, became famous for all the wrong reasons. By the mid-1990s, his behavior became increasingly dangerous. The turning point came when Elia attacked a taxi driver with a knife, inflicting serious injuries that cost the man an eye. Even then, his parents continued to support him. Yet they also recognized that drastic measures were needed. Because the family owned a property in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic, they decided to send Elia there in hopes that distance and structure would help him turn his life around. At first, the plan seemed promising. Elia found work at a family-run club in Santo Domingo, part of their broader business interests. But soon Elia and Alida learned that he had begun a relationship with a local woman, someone they believed had the same emotional instability and personal struggles as their son. The entire family opposed the relationship, fearing it would push him further off track. But Elia was stubborn. He insisted on marrying the woman, defying all objections. Every argument with his family ended with him threatening to run away permanently to start a new life with her. Tensions between Elia and his parents grew worse. Their disagreements became constant, and the household atmosphere deteriorated rapidly. Then came January 7, 1998. Its emergency operators received a chilling call that evening. A young man, barely able to speak and gasping for air, reported that someone had broken into the Del Grande home and shot the entire family. Before he could identify himself, the call abruptly ended. The dispatcher, alarmed and confused, immediately alerted the nearest patrol officer several kilometers from the villa. The Del Grande family was well known in the community. He was shocked that a shooting could have occurred in such a quiet, safe neighborhood. But instead of making quick assumptions, he approached cautiously, determined to understand what had really happened. When he reached the villa, everything looked eerily still. The house was dark, silent, no movement visible through the windows. Shortly after the patrol officer arrived, An ambulance pulled up to the address. The officer knocked repeatedly and rang the doorbell. But no one responded. He tried calling back the young man who had placed the emergency call, but the first attempt went unanswered. He dialed several more times. On the final call, someone picked up, yet no words followed. All he could hear was strained, panicked breathing. As if the caller was unable to speak, the situation clearly appeared dire. The officer decided he could not wait any longer. He forced open the door and stepped inside the house. Unsure whether the shooter was still present, he called for backup and moved cautiously forward with his weapon drawn. A quick sweep of the ground floor revealed nothing. So he proceeded upstairs. There, lying in a pool of blood near a telephone, he found a young man, 27-year-old Enrico Del Grande. Though gravely wounded, he was still alive. Emergency responders provided first aid and rushed him to the hospital. But he died shortly afterward. As the officer continued examining the home, he noticed heavy bloodstains across the living room and hallway. Following the trail, he reached the master bedroom. Beside the bed lay 53-year-old Alida Del Grande, already deceased from a gunshot wound. The room bore clear signs of a struggle. Items scattered across the floor and overturned objects indicated she had fought desperately for her life. But to no avail. The search continued through the villa until the officer reached the garage. There, next to the family car, he found the body of 58-year-old Enea Del Grande, the patriarch of the family. He had been shot multiple times in the back and head. He had died before help arrived. One person, however, was missing. The youngest son, Elia. Investigators searched the property, but he was nowhere to be found. Inside the house, they quickly noticed that one firearm from Enea's hunting rifle collection was missing. The caliber matched the bullets used in the killings. Shell casings were scattered near the victims, and an empty ammunition box was discovered in a closet. Yet far more rounds were missing than had been fired. Whoever committed the murders had fled heavily armed. Local residents were warned immediately. At first, authorities feared that the killer might have taken Elia hostage. Early speculation suggested a burglary gone wrong, but that theory quickly collapsed. Aside from the missing rifle, nothing valuable had been taken. Jewelry, electronics, cash, all untouched. There were no signs of forced entry on any door or window. These facts pointed to one conclusion: this was not a robbery. It was personal. And driven by hatred, the search for 22-year-old Elia Del Grande escalated rapidly. Within hours, the scenario shifted from a potential kidnapping to a manhunt for the primary and only suspect. Carabinieri investigators began gathering background information on the family, and the picture that emerged was troubling. These suspicions were reinforced when investigators confirmed Elia had a previous criminal record for a particularly brutal incident involving a taxi driver. When police interviewed the man who survived that attack, he recounted the event with visible emotion. It occurred shortly after Elia turned 17. The man, a local driver well known to the Del Grande family, had often driven Elia home after nights out. On that night, Elia had been agitated from the moment he got into the car. The driver, familiar with Elia's volatile temper, tried not to provoke him and remained silent. It made no difference. Without warning or apparent reason, Elia suddenly lunged at him, stabbing him repeatedly and inflicting injuries so severe that the driver lost an eye. The incident deeply alarmed investigators and raised serious concerns about Elia's mental stability. While searching his room, police uncovered a large collection of bladed weapons. Those who knew him described this fascination as an obsession. He owned nearly 100 knives of various shapes, sizes. Former classmates and teachers recalled him as impulsive, easily provoked, frequently involved in conflicts both inside and outside of school. He also gravitated toward extremist circles and was known to have associated with a group of local skinheads. Investigators soon discovered that the Del Grande family had tried everything to help him. Yet nothing seemed to make a lasting difference. In an effort to pull their son out of his downward spiral, his parents eventually made a drastic decision. They sent Elia to Santo Domingo. The family owned several properties there, including a nightclub that was popular with locals. They believed that distancing him from the troubled friendships he had formed in Italy would give him a fresh start. At first, the change of scenery seemed promising. Elia found work at the family's nightclub, and for a brief period his parents hoped he might eventually take a stable role in the business. But those hopes quickly faded. The nightclub scene was no less problematic than the environment he had left behind. It attracted all kinds of questionable characters, and hard-banned substances were readily available. It was there. Investigators believe that Elia, who had previously used only softer substances, began experimenting with much more dangerous ones. Even worse, he soon became involved with a young Dominican woman who works as an escort, servicing truck drivers. Instead of keeping his distance, Elia became infatuated with her and immersed himself in a chaotic lifestyle. Elia began financially supporting the woman, hoping she might leave escort. He paid for everything: her food, rent, clothing, and mounting personal debts. Month after month, he poured more money into the relationship. For Elia, his obsession with the young woman soon became as consuming as his fascination with weapons. Initially, he tried to hide the relationship from his family, but they quickly noticed that Elia's spending had spiraled out of control. He was wasting large sums not only on the woman but also on prohibited substances and other illegal activities. Concerned, his older brother Enrico traveled to Santo Domingo to confront him. When Enrico discovered the full extent of the situation, he immediately informed their parents. They insisted Elia return to Italy. But by then he refused to leave the Dominican Republic. Tensions within the family escalated. After Enrico's failed attempt to bring Elia home, Elia wrote an angry letter in which he openly expressed contempt for his parents and hinted that things would end badly if they continued interfering in his life. Still, the Del Grande family was determined. Shortly before Christmas 1997, they finally convinced Elia to return to Italy. But once he arrived back home, arguments resumed almost immediately, always revolving around the same topic: the woman from Santo Domingo. No one in the family wanted her entering their lives or their home. The hostility continued to grow, and Elia's resentment intensified. According to the reconstructed timeline, on the evening of January 6, 1998, Elia and his parents went to a local pizzeria for dinner. There, he once again brought up his desire to return to the Dominican Republic to marry the woman. He insisted he planned to wed her on January 10. To his parents, this sounded reckless and dangerous. Exhausted by his behavior, they struggled to stay calm. They had no intention of allowing their son to marry an escort. A heated argument erupted once more. Elia left abruptly and did not return home with his parents. Instead, he went to visit a friend, 33-year-old Pier Angelo, a stable hand from Vergiate and one of Elia's longtime acquaintances. This visit was no coincidence. Pier Angelo later told investigators that they spent most of the night drinking and talking. But this was not completely true. Elia had taken prohibited substances and left around 3 a.m. Agitated and fueled by anger, Pier admitted that Elia talked about wanting revenge that night. But he insisted he had not taken the threats seriously. In his words, Elia's dark, sarcastic humor often blurred the line between a joke and something far more sinister. Further investigation revealed that after returning home, Elia immediately seized one of his father's rifles. He loaded the weapon and headed straight to his parents' bedroom. He fired 2 shots at his mother and 2 more at his father. Though gravely wounded, his father managed to stagger toward the garage in a desperate attempt to escape. His mother tried to fight back, but she was overpowered almost instantly. Elia then moved to the living room, where his older brother, Enrico, was asleep. Enrico had already been jolted awake by the gunfire. He was shot twice as well. After he lost consciousness, Elia began staging the scene as a robbery. He scattered various objects throughout the house, took one of the family rifles along with ammunition, and fled the home. Despite his injuries, Enrico managed to call emergency services. In the hours that followed, Elia contacted several acquaintances and transferred yet another large sum of money to his girlfriend in the Dominican Republic. By dawn, he was already inside a taxi headed toward the Swiss border. His flight was short-lived, thanks to a rapid international alert. Swiss authorities stopped him at a border checkpoint. His strange demeanor raised immediate suspicion, and the guards detained him before notifying the Italian Carabinieri. Shortly thereafter, Elia was interrogated. He confessed to the triple homicide almost immediately. What shocked investigators most was his utter lack of remorse. His behavior from the very beginning suggested profound psychological instability. Mental health professionals evaluated him and diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder. He struggled with explosive anger, impulsivity, and a severe dependence on hard prohibited substances, yet no one had ever ensured he received treatment in a specialized facility. When speaking about his past, Elia often described the family environment as far from harmonious. Contrary to the image the Del Grande family presented to the outside world, he recalled with bitterness the years he spent living with his grandmother and aunt, describing them as a time of deep loneliness. According to him, both women resorted to physical punishment to control him. He said, feeling unloved and mistreated had caused lasting psychological trauma. Elia portrayed his mother not as a warm, affectionate figure, but as a harsh, controlling woman who used yelling, insults, and physical discipline to enforce her rules. His father, he claimed, was no different. Psychiatric experts later testified that such an upbringing, combined with his personality traits, could have contributed to his chronic low self-esteem. Emotional instability, and the persistent feeling of being judged or monitored. These factors, together with his escalating substance abuse, likely accelerated his psychological decline. After his first trial, Elia Del Grande received 3 life sentences. However, during the appeal, the court reduced the sentence to 30 years, ruling that he was only partially sane at the time of the killings. Even in prison, Elia's behavior continued to deteriorate. He attempted to escape multiple times and provoked frequent conflicts despite the high security conditions. One escape attempt actually succeeded, though only briefly. Investigators later concluded that he may have been assisted by his common-law wife, whom he had met while on a semi-open prison regime. A taxi driver proved instrumental in identifying him. He had been paid 400 euros by a woman to pick up someone outside the prison perimeter. During the ride, the driver noticed that the passenger kept hiding his face. Suspicious, he went to the police after completing the trip, helping authorities track down and recapture Elia. Elia was captured while trying to reach Sardinia and received an additional 8-month sentence. In practice, though, it made little difference, because he did not end up serving the full 30 years. Then came an unexpected, highly controversial development. In 2025, after serving just 25 years, Elia was granted early release, transferred to a semi-open facility in Olbia, Sardinia. The decision sparked immediate outrage. Residents were furious and frightened at the prospect of living near a man who had killed his entire family and who had repeatedly shown he was capable of violence. And almost immediately, Elia validated their fears. From the very first days, it became clear that he could not adjust to ordinary life. He frequently argued with neighbors, clashed with residents, and provoked multiple complaints. Some said he harassed people. Others insisted he was simply too dangerous to be living freely within the community. As a result, his freedom was restricted once again. A court ordered him to spend 6 months in a work-release facility in Castelfranco Emilia, in the province of Modena, after which his case would be reviewed again. This institution was a mixed facility where inmates of different profiles lived together. At the time of Aaliyah's transfer, around 40 individuals classified as dangerous to society were housed there, along with another 45 prisoners in various stages of social reintegration. Many had already been granted semi-freedom, which allowed them to go into town each day for work. The decision to house a convicted triple murderer in such an environment was met with significant criticism. Even law enforcement officers acknowledged that criminals with vastly different behavioral patterns require different levels of supervision. That reality soon became painfully clear. On the evening of October 30, 2025, Aaliyah managed to escape. Using a makeshift rope crafted from electrical cords taken from household appliances, he lowered himself from a window located on the only side of the building, not protected by fencing. No one realized he was gone until the next morning's head count. Surveillance cameras captured his escape. A large-scale search operation began immediately. But the first hours yielded nothing. No inmates in the facility appeared to know anything about Aaliyah's plan, and he left behind no obvious clues. After examining his background, detectives concluded that he was likely still in Italy, probably hiding in areas familiar to him. Patrols searched roads, bus terminals, train stations, rural paths, and abandoned farmhouses. Dozens of CCTV recordings were collected, but none led to him. Then Aaliyah reached out himself. On November 6, Novosti Varese received a letter signed by Aaliyah Del Grande. In it, he attempted to justify his escape. He expressed remorse for his past actions but insisted he could not remain in the workhouse. He criticized the reintegration facility, describing it as a poor imitation of a real prison, one that lacked meaningful rehabilitation programs. He claimed that psychotropic medications and prohibited substances circulated freely inside, and that many inmates were forced to remain far longer than necessary simply because they had no home or family waiting for them outside. According to Aaliyah, his escape was not an attempt to avoid punishment, but a choice driven by desperation, a way to spend the rest of his life in a more peaceful place. The letter ignited nationwide debate. On one hand, complaints about such institutions had existed for years. On the other, a man who had murdered his entire family was openly on the run and considered extremely dangerous. Authorities intensified their search. Eventually, investigators traced Aaliyah to Lake Monate. Under cover of darkness, he used a pedal boat to cross the lake, temporarily eluding patrols on the ground. But his efforts only delayed the inevitable. After 13 days on the run, on November 12, 2025, officers located him hiding in a small house near his childhood home in Cadrazate. He offered no resistance when arrested. The investigation into his escape is still ongoing, as detectives suspect he did not act alone. Now 50 years old, Aaliyah Del Grande has been returned to custody. Even so, Aaliyah is expected to be released again in just 4 years. His case has sparked national reflection, not only about public safety, but also about the structure and limitations of the Italian justice system. One question remains at the center of the debate. Can someone who murdered his entire family ever truly reintegrate into society? In a town where faith shaped everyday life, where families trusted their pastors as much as their own kin, no one imagined that a storm was quietly brewing behind closed doors. Waco, Texas, was the kind of place where people believed tragedies happened somewhere else. But that illusion shattered the night a Baptist minister picked up his phone and made a call that would alter everything. What followed was a tale of deception so deep and a betrayal so cold that it would take years before the truth finally clawed its way to the surface. The story that forces us to ask a chilling question: how well do we really know the people we trust the most? This story unfolded in 2006 in the quiet city of Waco, Texas, home to about 120,000 residents at the time. The community was deeply religious, with many churches and pastors serving local congregations. One of them was a man named Matt Baker. Late on the evening of April 7, 2006, Matt called 911 to report that he had found his wife, Kari Baker, dead in their bedroom. His voice trembled as he told the operator that he thought she had killed herself. According to Matt, Kari was lying naked in bed, motionless. Her lips were blue, her hands were cold, and she had no pulse. Matt claimed he had tried to revive his wife by pulling her from the bed and changing her into regular clothes, hoping it would help. When police and paramedics arrived, they found Kari on the floor. But paramedics could do nothing. Kari was already gone. Beside her was a handwritten note expressing sorrow and regret. In the early morning hours of April 8, 31-year-old Kari Baker was officially pronounced dead. Next to the note were bottles of sleeping pills and alcohol. To the police, it initially looked like a taken her own life. Matt and Kari had first met in 1994 when they were both attending college, although Matt was 7 years older. Just 3 months after meeting, Matt proposed. Kari's parents were shocked by this hasty decision, but she remained determined. They married soon afterward. As devout believers, they waited until after the wedding to begin their intimate life together, something Matt seemed especially eager for. Matt eventually became a Baptist minister, and the Baker family stayed in Waco. Kari became a teacher, working in both elementary education and special needs classes at church. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect church family, devout, loving, and deeply respected. But appearances were deceiving. In 1998, tragedy struck. Their daughter Cassidy, just 1 year old, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She survived the treatment, but in March 1999, Matt walked into her hospital room and found her unresponsive. She had died. Kari was devastated. Years later, she had 2 more daughters, Kenzie and Grace, but nothing could fill the void left by Cassidy. She attended therapy regularly, but the grief lingered like a dark shadow she couldn't escape. The pain slowly began eroding the marriage, creating emotional distance between Matt and Kari. After Cassidy's death, Matt repeatedly claimed that she had never recovered from losing their daughter. Even Kari's Bible, one Matt had given her, still carried the name Cassidy on the cover. Kari suffered from chronic insomnia and took sleeping pills daily. The evening before her death was painfully close to a difficult date, the 7th anniversary of Cassidy's passing. According to Matt, Kari struggled every year around this time. He insisted she would lock herself in her room for days, silent, withdrawn, barely eating, consumed by grief. Matt told investigators that on the night of April 7th, he left home to rent a light-hearted romantic comedy, then stopped at a gas station before returning home. When he reached their bedroom, the door was locked. He knocked, but heard nothing. Using a screwdriver, he forced the lock open and found Kari lying naked. 1-1. Kari's family, her parents and her sisters, could not accept the idea that she had willingly taken her own life. The so-called suicide note had been typed on a computer, printed out, and left unsigned. Matt insisted that Kari had been overwhelmed by grief for years, claiming it was only a matter of time before she did something irreversible. But her family knew her too well to believe that. They couldn't understand how Kari would abandon her 2 daughters, whom she adored, or walk away from her students, who brought her so much comfort. She loved teaching at the elementary school and had been excitedly waiting for a new job position to open in just a few months. Kari had real, tangible plans, ones no end her life person makes. Yet despite the strange circumstances, Kari's death was accepted at face value. No formal investigation took place. Police took a quick look around the Baker's bedroom, snapped a few photographs, and left. Just like Matt said, it was an end her life. But Kari's family refused to let their questions die. They met often, talking about Kari's life, their marriage, and Matt's behavior. During one of these conversations, they noticed something deeply unsettling. Before Kari died, her parents had added both her and Matt's numbers to their family phone plan, paying the bill every month and seeing the call logs. After Kari's death, they noticed that Matt was calling her number constantly, about a dozen times a day for 2 weeks. At first, they assumed he missed her and wanted to hear her voicemail. It was the only comforting explanation they could come up with. Unfortunately, the truth was far worse. When Kari's parents brought the grandchildren to visit Matt, they were shocked to see that all photos of Kari had been taken down or removed. Matt, meanwhile, appeared cheerful and energetic, as though he hadn't just lost his wife of 12 years. When they asked about the phone calls, he casually explained that Kari's number was now being used by another woman, a member of his Baptist church named Vanessa Bulls, who was 8 years younger than Matt and recently divorced. Matt and Vanessa had met through church and grown close. When Kari's parents began investigating on their own, they uncovered something alarming about Matt's history. During his university years, several women had accused him of inappropriate behavior. Later, when he became a pastor, 2 female parishioners, one of them a minor, also filed complaints. After 2 additional reports of inappropriate behavior, Matt was quietly transferred to another church to avoid scandal. Kari had always defended him, believing Matt was the victim of lies and misunderstandings. But over time, even she began to doubt his loyalty. She told her therapist she feared her husband was cheating on her and felt trapped, unsure how to escape the situation. After Kari's death, Matt seemed to recover quickly. He was frequently seen with Vanessa, despite insisting they were just friends. Kari's family grew certain that Matt had played a role in their daughter's death and filed a civil suit, accusing him of involuntary manslaughter. During the police investigation, disturbing details emerged. The night before Kari died, Matt had searched online for information about overdosing on sleeping pills. Kari's body was later exhumed for a second autopsy, but the results were inconclusive. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death, though one critical detail stood out. Kari's lungs were clear. She did not choke or inhale any liquid, which is quite unusual in cases of overdose. The family then hired a private investigator, and a second expert report noted faint bruising around Kari's mouth. This suggests she may have been drugged and then strangled to death, possibly with her mouth gagged to silence her. Matt continued, insisting he was innocent, and that his relationship with Vanessa only began after Kari's death. Kari's relatives pushed harder, prompting police to finally summon Vanessa Bulls for questioning. When investigators asked Vanessa whether she had ever had a romantic relationship with Matt Baker, she calmly replied that she had not. She added that she was willing to talk, but that they were taking up her time, and that she had a very busy schedule. Her dismissive attitude only deepened suspicion. During her first interview with investigators, Vanessa said almost nothing. She kept her answers brief, avoided details, and clearly held back. But as the investigation progressed and pressure grew, she realized the situation was far more serious than she imagined. Several months later, she finally agreed to cooperate. Her statements changed everything. Vanessa met Matt Baker at church before Kari's death. In the beginning, Matt simply watched her from a distance and smiled in an unsettling way. One day, he walked up to her and said, "Don't date other men, just date her pastor." He smiled. Vanessa laughed it off, assuming it was a joke. Not long afterward, during a social gathering at the church, Matt approached her again. He pulled her aside to a secluded corner and asked directly whether she genuinely wanted to get to know him better. He also told her that he didn't have any infectious diseases and had undergone a vasectomy, so they wouldn't need contraception. Vanessa reminded him that he was married and asked him if he had ever cheated on her. Matt simply laughed and answered, "No comment." Their affair began 2 months before Kari died. Matt painted a cruel and distorted picture of his wife, telling Vanessa that Kari was a bad mother who constantly made their daughters cry, that she was overweight, depressed, and no longer attractive to him. He repeatedly stated that he wanted Kari to completely disappear from his life. In late February 2006, Matt and Vanessa had their first intimate encounter at the Baker's house. Matt told her he had fallen in love with her. Later, in court, Vanessa would describe how Matt preyed on her vulnerability, manipulating her into believing every word he said. According to Vanessa, Matt openly discussed his plans to kill Kari. Around mid-March 2006, he told her that Kari regularly took sleeping pills and that he could make her die from an overdose. He said he once crushed medications, mixed them into a milkshake because Kari drank them often. Kari immediately tasted something strange, assumed the milkshake had spoiled, and didn't drink it. Matt also told Vanessa he wanted to tamper with Kari's car so she would crash and die. Whenever Kari was late, he said he felt a rush of excitement, imagining something terrible might have happened to her. Finally, Matt explained to Vanessa what had happened on the night of April 7, 2006. That afternoon, he had bought some libido-enhancing capsules designed to be easily opened. He emptied the powder inside, refilled the capsules with crushed sleeping pills and sedatives. Then he resealed them and left them on Kari's bedside table, telling her they were libido-enhancing capsules. That evening, Matt and Kari drank alcohol together. Kari took the tampered capsules, while Matt took the real ones so she would not become suspicious. Later, they went into the bedroom. Matt brought out handcuffs, new ones he had recently purchased. He handcuffed Kari to the bed, telling Vanessa it was part of their intimacy. He touched her until she drifted into a heavy, drugged sleep. Then he kissed her forehead, whispered that she should hug Cassidy for him. After that, he placed a pillow over Kari's face. He lay across her body, pressing down, waited. When he thought she was dead, he removed the pillow, only for Kari's eyes to suddenly open as she gasped loudly for air. Matt panicked. Angry that she had not died the first time, he clamped his hand over Kari's nose and mouth until she stopped breathing. After Kari's death, Matt typed a suicide note on the computer, printed it, and placed Kari's hand on the page so her fingerprints would be on the paper. He then locked the bedroom door, left the house to establish an alibi, rented a movie, and parked his car. His daughters were asleep in the other room. When he returned home, he forced the bedroom door open with a screwdriver and dialed 911, performing the role of a shocked and grieving husband. 5 days later, Matt met Vanessa and calmly explained how he had gotten rid of Kari. Before leaving, he warned her not to tell anyone about that, or she would regret it. Afterward, he sent Vanessa an MP3 file of a song by an American rock band titled Little Dirty Secret, a song he was obsessed with. Later, he called her again and repeated the threat, telling her he would be just as disappointed in her as he had been in Kari if she ever revealed his secret. Vanessa continued seeing Matt for a short time after Kari's death, but by July 2006, just 3 months after the tragedy, their relationship ended, and they stopped all contact. Despite this, Vanessa would later become the key witness in the case. Investigators recovered several emails from Matt's computer in which he described the milkshake incident, explaining that Kari had refused to drink it because she noticed the strange taste. In another message, he wrote that next time he would mix in more chocolate along with the crushed medications so she wouldn't detect the bitterness. Matt pleaded not guilty and used every possible argument to defend himself, insisting that Kari had taken her own life. But the evidence against him continued to build. Finally, in January 2010, after a lengthy investigation and trial, Matt Baker was found guilty. He was sentenced to 65 years in prison for murdering his wife and concealing her murder. For more than a decade, Matt repeatedly fought for his release, filing appeals and maintaining his innocence. In 2020, his final appeal was denied. To this day, he still refuses to admit any responsibility for Kari's death. It is also known that during his time in prison, Matt was repeatedly assaulted by other inmates as revenge for repeated wrongdoings he had committed both during his college years and as a pastor. On September 20, 2017, 19-year-old Corinna Slusser called her mother, Sabina Tuordo. Corinna was in Queens, New York. She said she wanted to go home. She explained that her driver's license and social security card were missing. Both had been stolen. Without those documents, she couldn't buy a plane ticket. So she said she would try to take a train instead. Her voice shook, as if she was afraid or hiding something she couldn't bring herself to say. Sabina, who was in Florida for her father's funeral at the time, told her daughter to stay inside, stay safe, and wait for help. That phone call would be the last conversation she ever had with Corinna. Investigators later discovered that later that same night, Corinna messaged a man named Giovanni Peguero, asking for a place to stay and help getting out of New York. He didn't respond until hours later, and by then Corinna was no longer picking up her phone. After that night, Corinna Slusser vanished without a trace. Corinna Page Slusser was born on June 10, 1998, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. After her parents divorced, she was raised by her mother, Sabina Tuorto. Corinna was outgoing, involved in school activities, and performed well academically. In high school, she was a cheerleader who loved makeup, fashion, and posting photos on Instagram. Friends remembered her as cheerful, approachable, ambitious. She dreamed of becoming a makeup artist, but signs of trouble appeared in 2016. She began spending time with a new group of friends, skipping classes, and slipping academically. Her behavior shifted. She became irritable, distant, unpredictable. Sabina noticed Corinna returning home late, sometimes not at all, and appearing with expensive items she had no way of paying for. That year, she was arrested for petty theft. By spring 2017, Corinna was in a deep emotional crisis. In April, she attempted self-harm and was hospitalized. After being released, she moved to Hazleton to live with a friend, hoping for a fresh start. She found work as a server at a casual dining restaurant, likely an Applebee's or something similar. At first, things seemed stable. She lived with her friend, earned enough to support herself. But soon, Corinna developed a desire for quick money and a luxurious lifestyle. Friends later revealed she began meeting older men who gave her gifts, cash, help with housing. She first referred to herself as a sugar baby. Her spending habits spiraled. She argues with her friend, sometimes she can contact her, sometimes she can't. Sabina tried to warn her about the dangers of the path she was heading down, but Corinna responded with hostility and anger on Instagram. She continued to present a flawless image using filters, bold makeup. Behind the posts, her real life was becoming unstable. Short-term stays, unknown apartments, and cheap motels. By summer 2017, Corinna was extremely vulnerable. Financial instability, fractured relationships, and her reliance on men she met online created the perfect conditions for being exploited. It was during this period that she first connected with Giovanni Pagero, a man who promised her a new beginning in New York City. On August 19, 2017, Corinna arrived in New York with Pagero, the same man she had been messaging, bringing only her cell phone and identification. She didn't even bring spare clothes. Pagero was older, confident, portrayed himself as someone who could provide stability. On her first day, he took her to the Harlem Vista Hotel and paid for several nights. He told her it was temporary until he found her permanent housing and work. Corinna accepted this. She was alone in a new city and relied on his guidance. She had no way of knowing she had just stepped into the center of a dangerous world, one she would never escape. The first 2 days in New York seemed manageable under his guidance. Pagero brought Corinna food, accompanied her to pharmacies and shops, gradually began telling her whom she could and couldn't talk to. He monitored her phone calls. Her personal documents eventually ended up in his possession, supposedly so he could help her get an apartment. He read her messages, criticized her photos, and commented on her interactions with other men. Corinna didn't immediately realize that her fresh start was turning into dangerous dependence. By August 21, the first arguments had erupted. Pagero became irritated by her messages, accused her of disappointing him, and demanded that she behave properly. She was only allowed to leave the hotel if he accompanied her. He refused to let her be alone for more than a few minutes. He blocked her friends' numbers, spoke negatively about her mother, and insisted that everyone outside of him was using her. Bit by bit, Corinna became cut off from the outside world. At 1:00 a.m., on August 25, Slusser called 911 from the Harlem Vista Hotel in Manhattan and said that Giovanni Pagero, a man she identified as her pimp and called Dad, had stolen $300 from her. When she confronted him, he grabbed her by the neck, choked her, and slammed her against a wall. When police arrived, she was still very shaken, trembling, and crying. Giovanni Pagero was arrested and charged with harassment, third-degree assault, and obstructing breathing or blood circulation. The court issued a temporary protective order against him on behalf of Corinna Slusser. When her family in Pennsylvania learned of the attack, she downplayed it and told them there was nothing to worry about. After his arrest, Corinna was completely isolated. She had no identification, no money, and no support system. The hotel room had only been paid for a few more days, and soon she had to leave. To friends, she pretended she was fine, that she had things under control. But in reality, her situation kept spiraling. Without her documents, she couldn't work, rent a room, or apply for assistance. Corinna stayed in New York because she felt she wasn't capable of returning home. Her relationship with her mother was broken, and she didn't want to admit that she was struggling. Instead, she turned to the internet for help, staying in the apartments of men she met online. They offered temporary shelter or assistance, but in exchange expected her attention, or what they called intimate. This kind of help was neither safe nor stable, and only increased her vulnerability. Some of the men she communicated with shared her information with others, requested adult photos, even suggested posting ads for her online. By early September 2017, her images began appearing on escort websites. The photos were cropped, filtered, and paired with rotating phone numbers. Her friends recognized her immediately. Whether she agreed or not remains unknown, but the process of pulling her into exploitation had begun. It was around this time that Ishiwani reached out to her. He already knew Peguero and operated in similar circles. Woni approached Corinna as someone offering help, promising safety, housing, and a fresh start. He convinced her to move into the Haven Motel in Queens. It was presented as temporary, but in reality, it was the first step in establishing full control. Within days at the Haven Motel, Woni began posting ads online using Corinna's photos. He set the prices, wrote the descriptions, and controlled all communication. Corinna was ordered to follow his rules. Their messages revealed total domination. Woni demanded constant updates, insisted on obedience, and spoke as if she belonged to him. Her movements were restricted. He monitored her phone constantly. Any independence she had left was disappearing. Other girls lived at the motel too. Tension between them grew. They competed for attention, clients, and control. Corinna, pressured from all sides, sometimes tried to act independently, but she backed down quickly. She had nowhere else to go. What had begun as a promise of help had turned into complete loss of freedom, her life controlled by someone else, her choices dictated, her identity taken. By the time she disappeared, she was already deeply trapped. September 20, 2017, was the last day Corinna Slusser was seen in public. Witnesses and motel surveillance confirmed that she walked out of the Haven Motel that morning. From that moment on, she vanished. When Corinna stopped replying to messages, no one immediately realized she was missing. Her chaotic lifestyle had conditioned people around her to expect silence. Friends assumed she had changed her number again. Her mother thought she was upset. Days passed before anyone understood that something far more serious had happened. Sabina returned from Florida at the end of September and immediately sensed something was wrong. Her home felt unusually quiet. Corinna wasn't answering calls or messages, and all of her belongings, the things she had left behind when she moved to New York, were untouched. That was when Sabina contacted the Bloomsburg Police Department. At first, the case was recorded as a voluntary disappearance. But when Sabina provided a copy of the protective order previously issued against Giovanni Peguero, along with letters he had sent from jail after his August arrest, authorities realized this was no ordinary missing person case. The investigation was transferred to New York. Detectives began tracing Corinna's digital and financial footprint. One of the first leads took them directly to the Haven Motel in Queens. The manager confirmed that a young woman matching Corinna's description had stayed there in September with a man who paid only in cash and behaved like her handler. She rarely spoke and always looked exhausted. She was last seen on the 20th. After that, the room sat empty for 2 days before housekeeping entered. Inside, detectives found scattered personal items, makeup, a pharmacy receipt, and an empty purse. But the essentials were gone: phone, ID documents, clothing. The room had been rented under a false name, and payments were traced to Ishiwani's debit card. When questioned, Wani insisted that Corinna had left voluntarily and denied knowing where she went next. He claimed she had been planning to meet someone in the Bronx. By then, his phone had been wiped clean and the SIM card replaced. A digital forensic review revealed that in the week before her disappearance, Corinna had accessed escort service websites repeatedly. Though her listings had been deleted, cached versions of the ads were recovered. They featured edited photos of her and had been posted from IP addresses in the Bronx and Queens, the same locations used by Wani's exploitation network. Investigators also found that several profiles posting the ads shared similar writing patterns and formatting, indicating they were controlled by the same group. As the investigation expanded, authorities uncovered individuals connected to Woni, who confirmed that Corinna had been working within their group for a time before she was taken over by another man. That man's description matched Piguero. This was the first direct confirmation that both men were part of the same trafficking circuit. Despite these findings, evidence was still thin. Corinna was legally an adult, and there were no official reports of abuse filed in New York. By late November 2017, detectives feared she may no longer be in the city. They reviewed bus, train, and airport footage, but found nothing. Her final phone ping came from the Bronx late on September 20. After that, her device went dark forever. The investigation hit a wall. Reports kept circling the same three names: Corinna Slusser, Giovanni Piguero, and Ishi Woni. Everything pointed to her last day. Beyond that, there were possibilities: voluntary disappearance, harm, or relocation within a trafficking network. None could be proven. Sabina Torto refused to let the case fade. She became relentless, determined that people would remember her daughter was not just another missing person statistic. She began with social media posts, messages to journalists, and persistent calls to police. Her efforts were met with polite but ineffective responses. The investigation was active, they said, yet nothing seemed to move. Sabina watched helplessly as her daughter's case slid towards silence. She began reaching out to anyone who would listen, including online communities dedicated to missing persons cases. Corinna's photos soon appeared on New York-based forums and even in public Craigslist groups. Sabina searched every listing herself, scrolling for hours, looking for any face that resembled her daughter. Sometimes she thought she recognized Corinna, different hairstyles, different makeup, different angles. Each time, she forwarded the lead to investigators, who assured her they would check it out. By November 2017, Sabina realized quiet persistence was no longer enough. The case needed attention, loud, public attention. So she went to the media, speaking with local Pennsylvania stations and sharing details about Ishi Woni's August arrest and Corinna's last confirmed day at the Haven Motel. It was the turning point. The story spread across social media. Suddenly, strangers were contacting Sabina with sightings. Someone claimed they saw Corinna on the subway. Another reported a girl resembling her in Atlantic City. Another said they rode the same bus. Some leads were vague, others detailed. Sabina sent every single one to authorities. People started paying attention to the case. Determined to keep the momentum, Sabina launched Help Find Corinna Slusser on Facebook and started raising funds for a reward. Within weeks, thousands followed the page. Volunteers designed posters, created digital flyers, and circulated Corinna's story across multiple platforms. Sabina traveled to New York, plastering Corinna's photo on street poles, bus stops, laundromats, convenience stores, anywhere someone might look. At one point, she received a police citation for posting without permission. She simply told the reporter that as long as people could see Corinna's face. Meanwhile, a legal battle was forming. Sabina hired an attorney and pushed for Corinna's case to be included in a federal anti-trafficking initiative. She succeeded. The classification changed from a voluntary departure to a high-risk missing person case with suspected exploitation. Everything shifted. Homeland Security got involved. Federal agents began investigating Ishi Woni's network, searching for other victims and mapping out digital trails that connected multiple traffickers operating across Queens and the Bronx. In a letter to the district attorney, Sabina wrote that her daughter was not gone and that she had disappeared into a system the district attorney was too afraid to name. She demanded that the district attorney bring her daughter back to her, alive or not. That letter was later quoted on cable news network. National media finally paid attention. In December 2017, the FBI added Corinna's name to the national database and issued a $10,000 reward. Overnight, her case spread across the country. Sabina was overwhelmed. Corinna's face was everywhere, but the one person who mattered most still couldn't be reached. The increased pressure forced investigators to question Woni again. He denied everything. His lawyer insisted Corinna was an adult making her own choices. He repeated the same lines. He last saw her on September 20. She left on her own. He was not responsible. Then came a breakthrough. A former acquaintance of Woni, a young woman who had once stayed at the same motel, contacted Sabina and her attorney. She described manipulation, fear, surveillance, and rules no one could break without violence or threats. She explained how Woni kept the girls in constant debt, controlled their phones, dictated when they could speak, sleep, or leave a room. This was the first direct confirmation that Corinna had not been acting freely. Sabina never stopped searching. She visited women's shelters, met with staff at crisis centers, showed Corinna's photos to social workers and outreach teams. She left her number everywhere. By January 2018, other mothers began contacting her. Their daughters had also disappeared. Same age, same circumstances, same cities. The stories followed the same pattern. Online connection, promise of opportunity, trip to New York, then silence. Sabina realized something devastating. Corinna's case wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much larger pattern. She began speaking publicly at community meetings, partnering with anti-trafficking groups, warning families that vulnerability didn't always look the way people assumed. It can happen to any daughter, in any home. By then, Sabina understood the possible outcomes. Corinna might have been taken, harmed, transported out of state, or she might still be alive somewhere, terrified and unable to reach out. But as long as no body was found, there was still hope, and Sabina fought to keep that hope alive, not only for herself but for everyone around her. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering everything they could, tracking down anyone connected to Corinna, every online account used in her ads, and every IP address associated with her digital trail. Yet, no decisive breakthrough emerged. Corinna had vanished in a city where countless people simply disappear. The clues were scattered and inconsistent. Witness statements conflicted, timelines overlapped, and nothing was strong enough to support formal charges. Sabina refused to wait in silence. She documented everything, every voicemail, every message, every conversation. Piece by piece, she created a complete timeline of her daughter's final weeks. That timeline eventually became the backbone of a public database, mapping Corinna's disappearance nearly hour by hour. It was Sabina's relentless dedication that kept the case alive when public attention drifted away. She reminded people that her voice had become the last one speaking for a daughter no one else could hear anymore. When Corinna Slusser's case finally went federal, the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York took over. Their working theory was that Corinna's disappearance was tied to intimate trafficking. This classification unlocked a wider range of investigative tools, from telecom subpoenas to access to restricted advertising platforms known to host illicit listings. Agents began examining her digital footprint using IP logs and phone number tracing. They uncovered dozens of online ads featuring Corinna's photos. Shockingly, some of these listings were posted in October and November 2017, weeks after she had already gone missing. The ads didn't list her name, but the images were unmistakable. Same angles, same outfits, same facial marks. The phone numbers tied to those ads shifted constantly. Some had been flagged in earlier trafficking cases. Many were masked using call forwarding services. Several were registered under false identities, women previously associated with Ishi Woni. This allowed agents to expand the list of potential accomplices and revealed that Woni's operation was organized and far-reaching, not the work of a single individual. The scheme involved fake ads, the use of proxies, renting housing under forged documents. Search warrants were issued for digital devices belonging to Woni and his known associates. The data recovered from seized smartphones provided critical evidence, including photos of Corinna Slusser, encrypted chats with clients, and audio messages containing direct orders and threats. Investigators also uncovered group chats, discussing prices, meeting locations, the frequency of encounters. One phrase, "she can't say no," appeared in several messages. When combined with statements from other victims, the evidence confirmed that Corinna had been controlled, threatened, and coerced. FBI interviews with other women connected to Woni produced mixed but illuminating accounts. Some were terrified and refused to talk. Others admitted they had escaped earlier. Several said they had heard Woni mention Corinna by name. A few said they had seen her photo saved in his phone. They explained that Woni often rotated ads among the girls, using images of whoever he chose to advertise that day. This could explain why Corinna's photos appeared online for months after she disappeared. At the same time, investigators tracked transportation activity and reviewed surveillance footage around Queens and the Bronx that placed Woni near the Haven Motel. The analysis showed that on the day Corinna disappeared, Woni was seen leaving the motel alone, carrying no bags or personal items. Despite his repeated claims that he didn't know where she went, the timeline of his actions told a different story. Law enforcement obtained motel entry logs and call records, which confirmed that after September 20, Woni continued using Corinna's phone number. This detail directly contradicted his account and strengthened suspicions that he was withholding information. Federal prosecutors began building a case for formal charges. The primary focus was human trafficking under aggravated circumstances, including coercion, threats, and the involvement of a minor, as well as participation in an organized operation. Corinna was 19 when she first met Woni. Authorities were also investigating other women connected to Woni, aiming to establish a broader pattern of exploitation that could support additional charges. Even without a recovered body, the search for Corinna expanded to every location linked to Woni: motels he had rented, apartments he frequented, and transportation hubs he routinely used. Despite multiple raids, investigators found little direct evidence tied to Corinna. However, during one operation, they recovered belongings belonging to another young woman. She later came forward and alleged that she had also been abused by Woni. Her testimony strengthened the investigation and supported a broader federal indictment by the spring of 2018. The case then entered a new phase. Authorities formed an international search initiative, fearing Corinna might have been transported out of the country, to Canada, the Dominican Republic, or elsewhere. Requests were sent through Interpol, but none of her biometric data matched border records. At this point, investigators were left with two grim possibilities. Either Corinna was no longer alive, or she was being held somewhere in the United States, completely cut off from the outside world. The FBI continued expanding the pool of suspects. At least 6 individuals connected to Woni and the online ads were officially named. Yet none of them could confirm seeing Corinna after September 20, and none could provide credible information about her fate. The investigation hit a familiar and deeply frustrating barrier: no body, no eyewitness, no definitive trail. Still, the evidence, gigabytes of digital data, testimony from multiple women, and extensive online footprints, painted a compelling picture. Everything suggested that Corinna's disappearance was part of a larger criminal network, not a voluntary departure. Her case became a stark demonstration of the dangers young people face in the digital age, how someone can vanish within weeks, slipping into the shadows despite a nationwide effort to find her. By 2022, the federal investigation into the disappearance of Corinna Slusser had officially concluded. The evidence collected over several years was enough to bring charges against Woni, who was found guilty of intimate trafficking and exploitation. At least 6 young women were confirmed as victims of his abuses. Although Corinna was not the central figure in the indictment, her disappearance loomed over the case, with numerous pieces of evidence suggesting Woni's possible involvement. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York sentenced Woni to 10 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole, and ordered him to pay restitution to several of the exploited women. The sentencing marked a rare moment in trafficking cases, an offender receiving a significant prison sentence even without a recovered body or direct physical evidence linking him to a missing person. Meanwhile, attention also returned to Giovanni Peguero. His arrest on August 25, 2017, remained the only legal action ever taken against him. He was never formally charged in connection with Corinna's disappearance. Despite being the one who initially brought her to New York, the turning point that led to her exploitation, he was not named as a suspect in the federal case. In court, Corinna's name appeared not as a witness or defendant, but as a symbol, a young woman who vanished somewhere between the internet, the streets, and a system that acted far too slowly. Her case forced a shift in how law enforcement approaches digital exploitation and the targeting of vulnerable young women. But for her mother, no legal victory could ease the pain. Corinna's body was never found, and her disappearance remains officially unsolved. Today, nearly a decade after she vanished, the story of Corinna Page Slusser remains one of the most haunting unresolved cases in modern trafficking investigations. A bright, ambitious teenager from Pennsylvania, someone who once dreamed of doing makeup and building a future, was slowly pulled into a world designed to erase people like her. To this day, Sabina still waits. Without a body, there is no closure. All she can hold on to is hope, the fragile, stubborn hope that somewhere, someone still knows the truth about what happened on that September morning. That morning, everything in the quiet Florida suburb was as normal as any other day. No one expected the doorbell to ring, shattering the peace. When the door opened, a clown appeared, garishly made up, dressed in colorful clothes, holding flowers and balloons. At first glance, everyone thought it was just a prank, but then, a gunshot rang out. No one reacted or spoke a word. The woman fell, and the clown calmly walked away as if he'd rehearsed it. Flowers scattered, balloons floated in the air, and blood stained the floor. This case is haunting because of its brutality and the terrifying control exerted by the perpetrator. It was clearly a meticulously planned crime, leaving the police baffled for years. The most agonizing question is, who truly was behind the disguise, the one who had orchestrated everything so perfectly? On the morning of May 26, 1990, the Warren home in Wellington, Florida, was awake and ordinary. The doorbell rang shortly after 11 o'clock a.m. Outside stood a clown, full makeup, bright costume. In one hand, a bouquet of flowers. In the other, balloons are floating just high enough to be seen from the street. The confirmed fact is stark and uncontested. When Marlene Warren opened the door, she was shot in the face. The gunman fired once, then turned away. Marlene collapsed inside her home. She would die from her injuries 2 days later. The clown walked back to a waiting car and drove off. The atmosphere left behind was not immediate chaos. It was disbelief. A child was present, close enough to see the clown, close enough for the image to lodge permanently in memory. Witnesses would later describe how the attacker did not run, did not shout, did not hesitate. The calm exit mattered. It suggested rehearsal, control, intention. Police arrived at a scene that resisted logic. Flowers on the floor, balloons drifting against the ceiling, blood where a welcome should have been. The disguise was not random. According to investigators, it served multiple purposes: concealment, misdirection, and delay. For a few critical seconds, no one understood what was happening. Those seconds were enough. Investigators began reconstructing the moment backward. Who expected Marlene to answer the door? Who knew her schedule? Who believed a clown would be ignored rather than questioned? The crime did not look spontaneous. It looked staged, down to the costume and the timing. And as the shock settled into procedure, one question pressed harder than the others. If this was planned so carefully, who was the performance really meant for? When violence enters a home, investigators almost always begin with the people closest to the victim. In Marlene Warren's case, that circle was small and immediately defined. She was a wife, a mother, living a structured suburban life in Wellington. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had been opened willingly. That fact alone narrowed the field. According to the investigation file, Marlene was married to Michael Warren. He was not home at the time of the shooting, but his absence did not remove him from scrutiny. Statistically and procedurally, spouses are examined first, not as an accusation, but as a rule of probability. Detectives reviewed his movements, his business dealings, and the dynamics of the marriage as they were understood in 1990. The atmosphere around the family quickly became strained. Grief was present, but so was pressure. Neighbors talked, rumors surfaced. The clown disguise had already distorted public perception, and now suspicion followed a familiar path inward. Investigators explored whether Marlene had conflicts, fears, or recent disputes that could explain a targeted attack. According to publicly available records, there was no evidence she expected danger that morning. What unsettled detectives was not what they found, but what they didn't. No clear threats, no documented stalker, No obvious enemy outside the household. Yet someone had gone to deliberate lengths to approach her front door without resistance. That suggested familiarity, not necessarily personal closeness, but knowledge of routine. As police worked through interviews and early leads, the case settled into an uncomfortable stillness. Everyone closest to Marlene was accounted for, but nothing fully explained the performance at the doorstep. If the answer was within the nearest circle, it was not revealing itself easily, and that raised a deeper question. If those closest could not be immediately tied to the crime, who else had reason and patience to wait behind a painted smile? The investigation moved outward, away from the front door and into the street. What witnesses remembered next became the first fragile thread investigators could pull. According to statements given that day, the clown did not flee on foot. The figure walked calmly to a parked car, got in, and drove away. No screeching tires, no panic, just departure. The fact that mattered was the vehicle. Witnesses described a white Chrysler LeBaron leaving the neighborhood shortly after the shooting. In 1990, before doorbell cameras and license plate readers, such details were both crucial and dangerously incomplete. A car description could anchor an investigation or quietly send it drifting. The atmosphere around this lead was tense but uncertain. Memory under shock is unreliable, and investigators knew it. Still, the consistency across accounts gave the description weight. Police canvassed the area, tracing similar vehicles, checking registrations, asking neighbors what they had seen, what they might have missed. Each answer brought movement, but no arrival. What complicated matters was timing. The car was gone within moments. No plate number was confirmed. Traffic cameras were scarce. The disguise had delayed recognition just long enough to protect the escape. Investigators were left with a silhouette of a crime, its edges already fading. As days passed, the case expanded geographically. Tips came in from outside Wellington. Sightings were reported, then quietly dismissed. The white car became a symbol of absence, proof that the killer had planned not just the approach, but the exit. Whoever wore the costume had thought beyond the doorbell, and that raised a sharper investigative question. If the escape was this controlled, how long had the person behind the wheel been preparing to disappear? As months turned into years, the Warren case slipped into a familiar category. Unsolved, but not forgotten. The leads thinned. Witness memories softened. The white car was never conclusively traced to a suspect. The clown, once vivid in the public imagination, became a symbol of how easily a case can freeze in place. The confirmed fact is that the investigation was never fully closed. Evidence was preserved. Items linked to the crime, including the clown costume, the flowers, and materials associated with the getaway, were logged and stored. According to investigators, nothing new could be proven with the technology available in the early 1990 seconds. The case waited, quietly, for science to catch up. The atmosphere during those years was one of suspended time. For Marlene's family, there was no resolution, only repetition anniversaries without answers. Headlines that faded and resurfaced. For detectives, the file became heavy with possibilities and frustration. They believed the killer had left traces. They just couldn't read them yet. Decades later, forensic science changed the ground beneath the case. DNA testing methods grew more sensitive. According to publicly reported court records, evidence from the original investigation was re-examined using modern techniques. What once seemed inert began to speak. Allegedly, genetic material linked to items associated with the clown disguise produced results that were no longer ambiguous. This was not a sudden breakthrough. It was a slow warming. Each test narrowed the margin of doubt. Each result reduced the number of plausible explanations. The case that had resisted resolution for nearly 30 years began to shift, not because of a confession or a witness, but because the evidence had been patient. And that reopened a question investigators had learned never to ask lightly. If the science now pointed towards someone they had suspected before, what had time been hiding in plain sight? By the late 2010s, the Warren case no longer lived only in memory. It lived in databases. According to court records and law enforcement statements, the renewed DNA analysis did not point to a stranger pulled from the dark. It pointed back toward a person investigators had scrutinized from the beginning. A familiar figure, now living under a different name. The verified fact is this. In 2017, Authorities arrested Sheila Keene Warren, formerly Sheila Keene, in connection with Marlene Warren's murder. At the time of the crime, she had been an acquaintance within the Warrens' orbit. By the time of her arrest, she had moved across state lines, adopted a new surname through marriage, and built a life far from Wellington. The atmosphere surrounding the arrest was restrained but heavy. There was no dramatic chase, no sudden confession, just the quiet collapse of distance. Time, which had once protected anonymity, now worked in reverse. Investigators alleged that DNA evidence connected Sheila Keene Warren to the clown costume used in the killing. The accusation reframed decades of speculation into a single prosecutorial theory. Prosecutors began assembling a narrative of motive, rooted in personal entanglement. According to the state, the crime was not random, nor symbolic, but directed, planned to remove one person from a complicated relationship dynamic. The disguise, they argued, was not theatrical. It was functional. For the family of Marlene Warren, the name change carried its own weight. A suspect had not vanished. She had adapted, lived, moved forward, while the case stood still. The arrest did not erase the years in between, it only exposed them. And as the legal process advanced, one question began to eclipse the rest. After so much time, could a courtroom still deliver a full accounting of what really happened at the door? By the time the case reached a courtroom, it carried the weight of nearly 3 decades. The fact at its center was unavoidable. Prosecutors were preparing to try a murder committed in 1990 with evidence tested in a different century. According to court records, the state of Florida sought a conviction that could result in life in prison without parole. The atmosphere inside the legal process was tense but cautious. This was not a case built on fresh witnesses or immediate confessions. Memories had aged. Some witnesses were no longer available. Physical evidence had been preserved, but every item would be challenged: its handling, its storage, its interpretation. Defense attorneys focused on time itself as their most powerful argument. Prosecutors laid out their theory carefully. They argued that the clown costume was purchased shortly before the killing, that fibers and DNA allegedly linked Sheila Keene Warren to the disguise, and that motive could be inferred from personal relationships documented at the time. The defense countered with uncertainty, alternative explanations, contamination risks, and coincidence layered over decades. As the trial approached, the risk sharpened on both sides. For the state, an acquittal would close the case forever. For the defendant, a conviction meant dying in prison. In 2023, before a jury could weigh the evidence, the case took an unexpected turn. Sheila Keene Warren entered a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The sentence, 12 years in prison with credit for time served, meant she would likely be released within months. The trial ended without testimony, without cross-examination, without the ritual of a verdict. The file closed, but not cleanly, and that left a lingering question in the quiet after the plea. When a case ends without being fully told in court, who decides which truths are officially heard? When sentencing was finalized, the math felt unreal. The confirmed fact was this: Sheila Keene Warren received a 12-year sentence, reduced by credits for time already served while awaiting trial. According to Florida Department of Corrections records, she was released in 2023, less than a year after entering her plea. The prison gates closed behind her, then opened again. The atmosphere surrounding her release was subdued, but unsettled. There were no crowds, no public statements from the defendant. For the Warren family, the moment landed differently. 33 years had passed since Marlene Warren opened her front door and never recovered. The passage of time had reshaped faces, aged memories, and reordered lives. Justice, when it arrived, did not resemble the version once imagined. Legally, the case was over. The plea acknowledged responsibility for Marlene's death, but it avoided a public trial. There was no jury verdict weighing evidence in open court. No final narrative tested line by line. What remained were fragments, facts proven, facts admitted, and facts never fully examined. For the family, time had not been something served. It had been something endured. Birthdays missed, holidays without resolution. A crime scene replayed internally while the world moved on. The sentence closed the legal file, but it could not rewind the years Marlene lost, or the years her loved ones spent waiting. The broader system took note. Cold cases rely on patience, preservation, and evolving science, but they also collide with legal realities. Sentencing frameworks measure punishment forward, not backward. They count years behind bars, not decades without answers. And as the headlines faded again, one final question hovered unresolved. When justice arrives late, does it still arrive whole? The Warren case ends where it began, at a front door that should have been ordinary. The confirmed fact is that Marlene Warren's murder was solved not by a sudden confession or a single witness, but by time, preservation, and forensic patience. Evidence collected in 1990, kept through decades of uncertainty, ultimately formed the backbone of accountability. The atmosphere left behind is not one of closure, but of quiet reckoning. The image of the clown never lost its power, but over time, it became something else. Less spectacle, more warning. The case demonstrated how theatrical violence can distort public attention while hiding something far more common beneath it: familiarity, access, and motive, rooted in personal proximity. For investigators nationwide, the case reinforced a lesson already written into policy, but often tested by budgets and fatigue. Cold cases are not dead cases, they are suspended ones. The Warren file survived because evidence was not discarded, because advances in DNA science were anticipated, and because someone returned to the questions when technology finally allowed clearer answers. For families of victims, the lesson is more fragile. Justice can arrive altered by time. Plea deals may close cases without telling full stories. Sentences may feel disconnected from loss measured in decades. The system resolves files. Families live with echoes. Marlene Warren is remembered not for how she died, but for what her case revealed: that violence can be disguised as celebration, that truth can wait quietly in storage rooms, and that accountability does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives late, sometimes it arrives incomplete, but it arrives because someone refused to let the door close forever. And even now, long after the clown costume has been sealed away, one unease remains: how many other doorbells rang and rang while the evidence was still waiting to speak?